Hello and welcome back to Week in Review with the one and only Doooovid. Looking forward to the show tonight. I think we're going to have a guest appearance from Gandalf, who is back in action after taking some time to attend to some personal matters. Without further ado, I will hand the floor over to you, Doooovid, for the introduction. Thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
Hey, good to be back, Church of Entropy. Jennifer, it'd be interesting to speak to Gandalf. I tried listening to his show on Claire in 2-Speed, so we'll see if he's got some interesting insights to share. My week was nothing hugely eventful. Just continuing in my studies. I pretty safely got out of the quarantine. God forbid, my grandmother passed away, and I went to the funeral, and someone who was at the funeral tested positive for COVID-19. I didn't get tested, although it's been now 2 weeks. I haven't showed any symptoms, so 2 weeks in 1 day. So, because I didn't show any symptoms, and I don't have like a regular job or necessity to be around people, I'm not going to bother getting tested. But in my area, cases are pretty high. They're hovering close to 4,000, which is about as high as it's ever been, and the death count in like the 20s, 30s. And that could get much worse. Trump's been around in Michigan. Gandalf comes back. We'll talk more about the elections. I did Charles Moskowitz on Thursday. We talked about what's going to happen maybe if Trump wins and all these new peace deals with Israel. And I've been playing chess for Israel, actually. So like I'm playing chess now on this Lee Chess, which is this French server. And there's really people from all over the world on the server, and a lot of people from the Middle East, a lot of Turkish people. And so we were talking about the possibility of peace deals that Trump has announced. And, so that was a pretty good show. I think it's got good viewership. So me and Chuck are turning that into a regular Thursday deal. And Chuck was on Luke one day this week, and, Luke's new business model, whatever, streaming model. He's taken the content down, or he's got a paywall basically now. And but I think Luke is going to be on Chuck's show Monday, so that should be interesting. And it's getting cold, so I went to synagogue this week, and most of the people are risking the indoor prayer service. I mean, there's social distancing and wearing masks, but still, indoor prayer service is relatively substantially higher risk than outdoor. Most estimates are that indoors is 20 times or more, some even say hundreds of times more likely for the spread of the virus than outdoors. But it's getting cold. It was almost at freezing. We had a tiny bit of snow, but it didn't stick. But it got that cold, and I was saying, like, I'll probably stand outside for the prayer service the whole winter. And I was thinking of what they call the Hasidei Ashkenaz. So Doooovid's a Hasidic Jew, which is like a theological school that I've talked about quite a bit, and I'm going to sing another Hasidic niggin today. But the very first Jews who moved to Germany were referred to as the Hasidei, which means like the pious of Ashkenaz, of Germany. Ashkenaz in Hebrew just means Germany, from the grandson of Japhet, who is believed to, according to Hebrew cosmology, to have founded the Germanic people. So the early Hasidic Ashkenaz, like my ancestors, probably from the town of Bamberg, mortified the flesh in a way that the Christians took later to much more extremes, like including permanent damage that Jews didn't really do. And but Jews, like, maybe self-flagellated each other and rolled around in needles, but most notably was endurance of cold temperatures. And generally, the simple idea theologically is people commit sin, and there has to be some sort of action reaction to nullify the sin. And the sin of the flesh is some form of self-mortification that Christians maybe took much more to an extreme, but Jews, at least, in the endurance of extremely cold temperatures. So I had read that literature, and I remember I was in Israel. I went with my family to Jackson Hole skiing. Have you heard of Jackson Hole, Jennifer?
Sounds familiar. I think I've heard good things about it.
Yeah, it's one of the best ski places in America. But we had went out there, and I flew straight from Israel to Jackson Hole and skied. I remember this cablist was telling me, like, that I should roll around like nude in the snow. And he was from Israel, and he never left Israel really, and he never even been in a place with snow. And he was like skiing or whatever, wasn't so impressed with that. But like the opportunity to like atone for my sins by this self-mortification act of briefly rolling around naked in snow. I'm not sure if you've heard of such activities, like even through Hinduism or just being a Canadian.
I'm just thinking of like penance is the first thing that comes to mind. Penance when you say that. But then there's also the term in the eastern side, which is tapas.
I mean, like in Ottawa, in Canada.
Oh, but yeah, in Canada, living in Canada itself is a test of your patience, as well.
So even if a person's not like a devout person who's trying to atone for their sins, like just because there's a lot of snow and people do stupid things, like I'm sure that's semi-common thing to do.
Yeah, what's the thing that people do is roll around the snow, then go into a sauna. We used to do that at Lake Placid, where my grandmother had a condo, and the golf course is there, and it had a very nice sauna, one of those wet saunas. You can pour water.
I had actually done that skiing, like at the Grand Targhee, which is near Jackson Hole, as a kid, not for any penance, just because I was like a stupid kid doing stupid things. But this concept was relatively common, and factually, that like Germany's a cold place, and at the time where the Jews about 1,000 years ago got up into Germany, it was probably the coldest place where Jews were living. I mean, there were some Jews maybe in England that came a little bit later or further north, but generally, the Jews are a Mediterranean people, and the first Jews to the land of Ashkenaz of Germany, the cold winters would have been a relatively new phenomenon, and therefore it talks about this phenomenon of fear of God counteracting the forces of cold. In the same way, also there's statements about fear of God, fear of God counteracting the forces like alcohol, being drunk, or even intoxicated substances. But it's interesting, if Gandalf comes on later, he might even have thoughts of it because later the Germanic peoples. But I was mentioning this because I think I'll probably end up going to pray and standing outside the whole winter, even if it's cold. And like, I'm not a regular skier now, but I ski pretty actively as a kid, and I think I don't think I'd have any problem, dressing warm and standing out a few hours, even if there was a substantial amount of snow. And maybe my Ashkenazic Jewish ancestry, it's some sort of sign from God, because like chances are hundreds of years of my ancestors who got together to pray probably stood outside or stood in like barns or structures that were extremely cold.
Yeah, that's interesting to sort of tie it into the history and how the land shapes the attitudes in a way. Like you still have this like foundational identity, but then pushing it into the great north, or underworld as it's been traditionally called, has this sort of change in how certain scriptural elements are interpreted. It's very interesting. Thank you for sharing.
The Aryan invasion theory going both ways. If you look at the Aryans, so to say, coming from whatever region and migrating to Europe or different places, that would have shaped the fact that okay, it's cold winter, and or it's a different climate, and activities or rituals that maybe at one point were done outdoors now have to be done indoors, and certain factors like that, or what type of agriculture animals are available would have effects on the religious practices. But it's a little bit off. We could talk about a bit interesting. So let me lead this into a chant. And
just to put a bow on that before we move on, I just wanted to real quick mention those two words that I was talking about before. I just have them shared. So if people,
please do.
If people want to see a little bit of how we're always talking about multiple angles and multiple truths and so on and so forth. Part of the reason I push that, at least, is because considering things from multiple angles actually gives you a better understanding of what's really going on. So I just wanted to call attention to these ideas of penance, which is a long-standing idea, and to contrast that a little bit with tapas, which is sort of the first thing that comes to mind, but the underlying assumptions aren't quite the same with tapas, but it does have this shared attribute of being enormously challenging. And that's all I wanted to say. Back over to you, Doooovid.
Yeah, I love in ISKCON, like just because the word austerities, like I don't think I ever hear the word austerities ever, but like every time I go to ISKCON, like every other like paragraph has the word austerities in it. I mean, like, right?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's like super important on the higher spiritual journey that there's this period of, I guess penance is the best translation, but really what it is you're doing the super hard things in order to get virtue, not to atone for sin.
I talked about, because I was bringing this whole thing to COVID-19, why I'm standing outside to pray, because like relatively, we're like, let's pray outside in the cold, like maybe as a Hindu or like some old day, like in Israel, like trying to reach some spiritual heights, it would have been interesting to do something like that. But like, no, I mean, generally no one would even consider doing that. But he said like COVID-19 transmission is substantially less likely outdoors, maybe even 100-fold, that'd be okay. I'm going to pray outside. I'll bear the cold. To think about historically in the religion, when in the ancient times when austerities were more common, and related to like Luke Ford and the IQ angle is just calling impulse control. That austerities is a form of impulse control. But we could go into depth in this. I have a pretty good song. This song, when I first got to Jerusalem, I first went on a 6-week trip, and on Sabbath in Jerusalem, they have these large groups, probably kind of like Vrindavan or something, where there's these large synagogues, Hasidic groups, cultish groups that all gather, and they sing and they chant. So you could just walk down the streets and you could like hear singing, and you could kind of just join in. So maybe next week, the first place when I was there, I found was this place Krechnov, where they're an interesting Hasidic group, and I could tell stories. They still exist, very prominent. The leader of the group is actually a real estate magnate with properties in England, Israel, and New York. But the signature of a lot of these Hasidic groups is the songs that they sing. And a lot of times in the Vedic world, also kind of like the pinnacle of the science of spirituality could be demonstrated in music, because at the end of the day, when all the sages and people and devotees get together, there's going to be chanting, and the chanting is going to be to music. And usually there's signature songs and tunes. So it's like Judaism, or something where it's like, what the mantra is going to be chanted, the prayers, and there's a little choice of like the melody. So it's not even like a discretion of the group what the mantra is going to be chanted. The only discretion at all is the melody. So the melodies become distinctive signatures for these gatherings of science. So I've mentioned the Hasidic idea, Kabbalistic idea of tunes is they all have this 4-part structure. Not all of them, but the vast majority of them, that form a meditation on God's name. But also like in a classical music era, because most of these come out of Eastern Europe and have gypsy classical music, European classicalism inspirations behind them also, and go back hundreds of years. And so to say, these cultic movements have been chanting the same melodies for hundreds of years. So this other one, I have some chants on my channel that are very popular, the Total Savram Yitzchak Rebbe. And he probably had the biggest public gathering in all of Jerusalem, where just hundreds, maybe thousands of people would gather and chant. And they're political, they have their ideology. We don't have to talk about that right now, but when it comes to the ritual, they gather, they chant, anybody's welcome. And so if you walk down the streets of Jerusalem on a Friday night, I'm not sure now what COVID-19, unlikely, you hear the chanting and you could join them. But this songs are basically the same song. So this song was an old Lubavitch melody that they sang there, and it's a very kind of enchanting melody. And it's a long one, and it has a 4-part structure, but it's a little bit more complicated. So I'll try to just do the high part, the third part, and a little bit of the lead in. And this, what call like a nigun devekis, where it's a meditative melody to exhibit a person to give their all to, in Hebrew they call it avodas Hashem, the service of God. And the chanting, the melody of the tune will take a person to where it's kind of like a little catchy melody hook to where they're almost like yelling at the top of their lungs. And it's the purpose of the melody, the purpose of to really enliven, activate people. So in Jerusalem, this would have been chanted with 1,000 people, and it was chanted for like a year. I forget the melody actually perfectly. I haven't heard it over like 20 years, but with that's so I'm kind of just going to start in the middle of it, and then it has an interesting called bridge to the high part. I won't explain the tune, but it has a very interesting structure, and actually like kind of Kabbalistic, like I said, in a physical level, to cause a person to exert to try to reach very high notes, but also kind of like the way the music is structured in the theme and variation. Did I ay 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 did I oh yeah 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 mama 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 Dee die 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 ya 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 ya. Did I yo yo did I yeah 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 did I yeah 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 oh oh yeah 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 yeah. Nine, nine, ay, 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 I probably butchered that one up actually pretty badly. I haven't really heard that for like 20 years, but I had that one in my mind today. And, not the reminding me of what it felt like to be in Jerusalem, um, where thousands, I don't know, thousands, hundreds of people would gather and chant that really to be yelling at quite. I mean, it was melodic and nice singing, but almost like yelling, and uh, and to walk the streets of Jerusalem, where that would be what you would hear. That I was talking to Charles Moskowitz about these peace deals. Maybe Israel makes peace with Iran and all these countries. Maybe we rebuild the temple. Maybe Jerusalem could be completely developed as a city in a Haredi haven with like the new temple and designed the way for Jewish ultra Orthodox worship. Um, but still, Jerusalem is somewhat like that. It's an ultra Orthodox area, and if you walk down the streets on Friday night, that's what people do. They gather in mass and chant these tunes, and that's very similar to something like Vrindavan, where it may be the name of Krishna, but if you were in Vrindavan, there'd be temple after temple after temple, and they all would be packed of people chanting, various melodies, and like I said, there would be a key signature, like that melody matches a movement, and there's actually quite a bit to the melody. So it'd be like, oh, you're part of this group because this group in Jerusalem gets together and chants this tune, but also historic, like this tune is representative of a school of a spiritual understanding. So with that, I guess thanks for letting me open with that, and you're welcome to Week in Review. I'll hand it over to Jennifer for any comments she wants to say on anything I said and to give her Week in Review.
Sure. Yeah. Well, just comment on the chanting. I think it's very brave to solo chant, um, because it's so challenging to raise the energy to the level that it needs to be at to actually do it correctly. But then when you have a group, they're supposed to sort of chant along with you, which I suppose the apt metaphor is like a bunch of pencils with a carpet on top of them. If one pencil tries to push up the carpet, it's a lot of work. But if all the pencils push up at the same time, it's sort of distributed evenly, like with those nail beds. So the point of it is to share the burden of consciousness. And I think that this chanting is a more accelerated form because if you do it for progressively longer, you're essentially sharing the heaviness of consciousness. And this sort of informs why it's so difficult for most of us to live alone, because having other people around sort of uplifts us in a subconscious way, because the burden of the computation of consciousness is put out distributed across the network rather than just saddled on one individual. So it's interesting, but to really, for the audience who are interested in this stuff, to really get the experience, it's you have to have a group of, I would say, at least 6 people just to sort of get that base energy. And we're joined now by Gandalf, who has been taking some time to get things in order, but is now back to contribute his unique and highly penetrating insights. Welcome to the show, Gandalf.
Welcome. Thanks for having me. I'm quietly in suburban bliss and out of city hellscape. I tell people I went from the shithole to the Shire, and I'm very happy. But thanks for asking how I'm doing. I mean, I was quite a bit stressed for a while. Things were a little bit rough. Things are kind of quite bad in many of America's urban environments, and I know some people were worried that like I died or something. It's just sort of like I had a lot of stuff to do to make sure I could get out of there in one piece. Given what's going on, so I appreciate the fact that people wish me back. So tell me about what's been going on with the show.
Well, we've been getting a lot more, I guess our presentation of our theories is getting tighter, and the conversations are getting more serious between Doovid and I, and we're hoping to sort of catch people up. So we're always thinking about new ways of introducing things. So my writing on my blog has been trying to, I don't want to say dumb it down, but at least give insights that are practical for people to just start using right away. And in terms of cultural movements, it seems like this. I've had to deal with some what I call neo Vedantins lately. So there's like different sort of categories of people that I just sort of loosely use. You know, you got your ideological demagogues and so forth. And one of these types of people is what I call the neo Vedantin. So, like a person who's basically like what Duvid describes as a Maya body. Hey, what's going on, Doc Niren? Nice to see you, buddy. Glad you joined the show. Hopefully, you'll enjoy what we're talking about this week. And again, to the audience, any questions, throw them in there and we'll get to them. If we don't get to them right away, because as you know, there are some very wonderful monologues that happen in this show, just keep asking it until we get a chance to actually answer it. I will try to note them down. But yeah, I've noticed this trend in people, and I've always avoided these people, these what I call neo Vedantins, also known as Hare Krishnas, but they're sort of a step beyond Hare Krishnas, because Hare Krishnas are basically like, I don't want to say they're all recovering meth heads, but there's a lot of damaged people who gravitate towards those things. This is a step beyond that. So this is like, Howie Hughes tier people who think that because they've done some drugs or read some books or what have you, have some mystical, unique insights into the nature of esoteric things like consciousness. And every single interaction I've ever had with one of these people involved them telling me that I should read something, read whatnot. And then they insult me, and then it's just like always the same thing over and over. So there seems to be a wave of this type of neo-Buddhistic, neo-Vedantin. I read a book and therefore I'm an expert on everything and I'm enlightened because reasons. So having to deal with those people is something I've been kind of dreading, and which is why I've sort of steered myself towards other types of people like scientists, even religious fundamentalists, like literally rather have a debate with a religious fundamentalist of a different religion than have to debate one of these neo-Vedantin quacks. But yeah, that's basically where things are at. That's not so much a week in review as maybe a couple months in review, but I'm usually very much a laggard at giving these things, so try to overcompensate.
Very interesting. What about you, Doovid?
Yeah, so ditto for that. And yeah, we were actually going to talk about even like chapters and outline for our book. So I'm pushing forward with the multiple truth hypothesis and some research. I've been playing more chess because of the lockdown. I've actually got internationally competitive on these chess variants, and I've looked into some of these studies about IQ and how the mind forms thought, because chess is one of the most well-studied things. So that's been keeping me busy, like reading. Unfortunately, my grandmother passed away, the last of my grandparents, and all of my grandparents have chosen cremation. So we talk quite a bit about, death and reincarnations. One of our most recurring topics. COVID-19. I've been doing Charles Moskowitz out of Boston regularly Thursdays, who's like Jewish conservative Trump shiller. kind of like Hasbora agent, but even pretty good dude. He's written 10 books. I'm still on Luke for it every once in a while. But not much, just kind of laying low, reading, get a little bit of activity and family and stuff local. My sister's in Chicago, and I mean, we haven't talked in a long time, but like Passover, I tried to send her matzah, and I don't think she got it till the second day. Like, even though I paid like the 1 day shipping, it still took over a week. And I even sent her toilet paper a few times. Like, it costs more money in shipping than the toilet paper itself, but she needed it. And like, I'm advising maybe she should get out of there. But yeah, the urban area is pretty difficult. Like in the suburbs, my situation is pretty stable. So thank God, like I'm just continuing my research. And actually, I think me and Jennifer both feel like we make a lot of progress. This guy, Charles Moskowitz, said he wrote another book, Lockdown. He put out a book on his belief in God and outlook on Judaism. So, props to him. I talked with him about Trump and these new deals with Israel. There's not too much. I'm following politics. I'm not really talking about it. I'm pretty skeptical. I'm a registered libertarian. I'm not going to vote. Even though like I'm relatively pretty connected to Trump, but I think he's in over his head. And like I was a critic of his when I knew people who were dealing with him. I was a critic of his business model. So like I'm still a critic of it, but I could see bigger forces where Trump could win landslide. I don't know if you want to go straight into talking, like if you're back or Jennifer still didn't do her week in review, and like we were going to do our usual stuff, which has been getting a lot more math and science because we had Vince on a number of times, Howie, Super Libra, different characters, but like generally it's been more just me and Jennifer, and it's been getting a lot more technical, a lot more like mathematical equations, and I think our theories are advancing. Like JF did a 2-month no guess thing, and I think the crackdown. Adam Green was kicked off YouTube. I'm not. I might still be in some of those circles for debates, but the censorship, I think it's more rare. People are less likely to step up now. It's harder to be in a non-interesting commenter, and the risk is higher. And I think Josh Neal and Thamster, they're doing their thing, but they just talk politics. I mean, you could still be on YouTube, and if you know how to keep the political correctness, but I think it's became relatively unexciting, and the availability to reach larger crowds through streaming is extremely small now.
I also think that some of these pundits have tried to explore the question of consciousness, and because their axioms are wrong, they're not really getting anywhere. Like I told Gandalf, I don't know if you checked this out, and I think you saw it, Doovid, but the back and forth between JF and Keith Woods, which was like response video, volleyed back and forth maybe 4 times. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, and I mean they got to do their homework. I was saying like Doovid publicly did my homework for over a year now, and so when I'm quoting to you papers and names of real people who are at and heads of real institutes, JF, like he hasn't kept up with it. Like he has a PhD, he's a smart guy, but he did not keep up with this stuff. So when it comes to Hameroff, Penrose, quantum consciousness, he just hasn't read it. And maybe he'll come around and do it. And like Jennifer has faith, he's a high IQ guy, and he could probably understand it, but he may not. And if he doesn't put the work into it, say Penrose, me and Jennifer have been talking about Penrose since we first started talking, and so now he's got a Nobel Prize. David Bohm, I could see like the reason I'm doing this, like the reason me and Jennifer started talking together in the first place in doing Week in Review, is because we basically saw that the type content that we're interested doesn't exist, and therefore we're going to try to produce it ourselves. So there's guys out there like Hameroff and interesting people, science and non-dualism, and even JF and thinkers all over the place, and you could kind of connect to them. Most of them are in the financial model where they're they're not like me and Jennifer that do this out of our spare time, largely as a service or a love joy of figuring things out. But once you're in the profit model where you're doing it for a living, it completely changes the nature of how the science is done, and that's probably why they're not really getting anywhere, and they're probably not going to get anywhere. So, me and Jennifer, I think we pretty much agree that the next step for both of us is probably to publish a book. We do streaming, or maybe COVID-19 is over, like book tours or speaking or different things. But having and we also I like multiple truth hypothesis, and I think the ideas benefit someone at every level. But at the end of the day, it's going to be like all mathematical logic and symbology, and even something that could be programmed into a computer, and maybe even machine learning algorithms. But it doesn't mean that there's not going to be simple things that any person, multiple truth hypothesis, there's multiple ways of looking at things. And that's why I'm relating it to chess, where you have multiple decisions, and each decision that you make opens up multiple different possibilities that will in return allow you to make another series of decisions and so on. And I think I convinced Jennifer, I mean, though she probably already knew and agreed, that our theories for the masses, we're doing this largely as a service to humanity. Like I said, the Talmud says, Talmud Chacham Rishus Rabim, a sage is public property. So if you have sage wisdom, if Gandalf was given a high IQ, like the Luke, to much was given, much is due. I mean, much is owed. But basically, you're public property, and you have to see yourself that way. You have to accept that you have to help people who and you have to say yes when people ask you something. You just have to basically always try to say yes, even though but whatever that case will be, that we want to submit something that will be accepted in the academy, like a scientific paper, something like Penrose and Hammerhoff, a scientific paper that could be discussed and accepted in the journals, even though the majority of people never read that stuff.
One thing I wanted to come up to, which was that I put out a new video this week, and Gandalf said he liked it, and so I can play it. It's only a couple minutes long there. I'll just go to that. Today we're going to learn about how to draw the transitional diagram of cosmology. We're trying to answer the question of where new solar systems come from. Now, in order to do that, we're going to start by situating the centroid. That means we're drawing a two-dimensional lattice like the familiar Cartesian plane, and that's our starting point on the diagram. Next, we're going to draw concentric circles around the center. I've done 5 here. Next, at a 45-degree angle to the x-axis, we're going to introduce the first exclusion event. So that means mass is going from the very center to just adjacent the center. It's got particular velocity at that point, as well as an associated mass. That velocity on its own is linear, but because it's in the gravity field of the object that excluded it, it doesn't look like a line when we go to observe it. Continue that path on the shape of the circle for another 90 degrees, and we're going to map the next exclusion event there. We're going to continue this throughout the 5 layers that we've drawn. At every 90 degrees, we introduce another exclusion event. Next, we're going to come to the more complex portion, the most difficult portion of the drawing here, and that's to get the pure form archetype just right. It has to connect all the points on the path of your excluded object, and so you're trying to get it as smooth as possible, always going through all of those points. So that takes a bit of practice. it's important to appreciate that this is the most technically challenging portion. So to perceive the entire shape as one entity is going to get you the smoothest rendering. And the next path that we're going to draw is the real path, which actually includes the quantum state exclusions. That's a lot easier because it's always going along a circular path. So when we go to observe this, this is actually the path we would expect to see, where there's those finite, discrete, exclusionary bands. The circles are just a backdrop to help bring out the image of the contrasting pure form and actual paths. Thanks for watching that, guys. I appreciate it. Yeah, so what that was meant to show was your basic mechanism for how quantum state exclusion causes the formation of stars, etc. So it's pretty much just stars, but then stars create planets. So you have this super dense region in the center of the galactic matter, which is so dense that it squeezes out the waveforms that have mass that can't fit there, and then it plops them down as suns. So that's, the universe's version of pooping, I guess. So there was a question I just want to quickly get to before we go to the other panelists, is Aiken asking if they're geodesics. So that's a good question. Like, how do geodesics play into this argument per se? So we have to go to the definition of a geodesic. And if we can, that's a general term that means the shortest distance between two objects. So as mass is being formed, we don't say created because there's no true creation, but as it's being formed, it's going to follow what I call an energetic geodesic. So these geodesics, the most familiar geodesic that we have is the straight line, because in 3 space, R3, right, the 3D Cartesian place, the geodesic is a line. But on the planet, because the planet is a certain shape, it's not. We can't just go through the planet to get from one place to another. Therefore, the geodesic, if we're talking about the planet, is something called a great circle. And so if you want to know the shortest distance between 2 points on the planet, which is approximately a sphere, you need to intersect a plane with the sphere. And then the intersection of that plane between the two objects that you're trying to go from one to the other, that's the geodesic. So these are called great circles. And you can see in the corner of what I've got on the screen right now is actually showing you how they map out the directions that planes will take. This is why when you look at if you're ever on a plane and you look at your overall journey, it can seem confusing. Like, why is the plane taking this route? It's because what you're looking at is the stereographic projection, i.e. a 2-dimensionalization of a 3-dimensional form, which is going to have some errors because there's no such thing as a isomorphism from a sphere to a plane. So yeah, the energetic geodesic in this case is the pure form archetype, which is the spiral. So the spiral, that's what's telling matter how to act. So on the last show, if you want to go into this deeper, I talked about how spheres are the supreme grand ultimate pure form archetype, i.e. ultimately everything, every shape, you can trace it back to a sphere. So one of the derivative shapes that we could look at is once these spheres, excuse me, try mouth here, start popping out, they start to follow a spiral shape. So the point of that video was to illustrate how through strictly concentric circular spherical creation, you can precipitate a spiral arm, because as it grows, it's going to start to move away from itself, because that's geodesic. That's where the geodesic is coming in, because matter wants to be at equipotential to itself, i.e. entropy wants matter to go to the state where everything is basically the same. There's this push in matter to go to a balanced out sameness, but there's only a finite number of quantum states available, which is why we have these quantized planets, quantized suns. So the idea that more suns could be created where we are right now is misunderstanding the mechanism, because the space around us didn't get created till the sun did, and it was created as a pocket. Like, you could think of our solar system as a little bubble that, now that it exists, it has differentiated space-time in it, whereas before it was just nothing. So it wouldn't be possible for more suns to come into that. Why? Because the quantum states are filled, and they're only filled to the point that they need to be to conform to entropy, which is this equipotentiality. But we see distinctions arise because there's only a finite number of quantum states available in the universe. So pure form archetype is your spiral, but what actually happens is not a true spiral, because what's happening is that you have discrete quantum state transitions that occur when too much density happens. There's a density maximum in the universe. Whenever it's close to being breached or on the verge of breaching, it will simply resituate the matter to the closest, lowest energy available state. All those three things have to be satisfied. And so the red shape is the true shape, and the underlying spiral is the pure form that's dictating the progression of the system as a whole. But we never actually observe the pure form archetype IRL, because of the same reason we don't observe the sphere archetype, because it's excuse me, it's a pure form. It doesn't exist in observable reality, but nevertheless dictates the course of evolution of observable reality, which is vibrating, oscillating, constantly changing, as opposed to the metaphysical reality archetype realm, which is what we call static. Who would like to take over? Because I need a drink of water here.
Yeah, I would. My first thought was, because you're talking about spheres and spirals and talk about archetypes, is it possible to consider the sphere an archetype, meaning archetype, like the archetype of all archetypes in terms of form?
Well,
maybe
we have two distinct starting points, axiomatically speaking, right? So traditionally, we have subjective axioms. So this sphere, there wouldn't be a sphere. Why? Because all the knowledge was derived subjectively, which means that your canonical base form archetype's got to be something subjective, and spheres aren't, right? I don't know if that's something people agree with or not. When I think of a subjective entity, I don't think of a balloon, okay? How about that? But if we're going to go from the objective stance, which is starting from the base of material reality, you can make the argument that the sphere is the archetype among archetypes. I don't know how exactly you want to word it. I think we should take time to mull these various labels over, because we want to pick an accurate term that's going to stick. Like, you don't want to have something with 6 syllables, right? Because, like, people call me Jen, right? Because 3 syllables, right? Who has time for that? So that's sort of what.
Unless you're a German naming complex concepts. That's the one exception.
Oh, right. I forgot about Operation Sauerkraut. Okay, just forget everything I just said. Yeah, so Aiken's saying the universe has a phase space. Yeah, so these concepts that derive from Cartesianism don't necessarily, usually they do, but they don't always have analogs in my system. Why? Because my system is taking into account how matter actually works, which is quantization. And there's no way to have anything where the operations of calculus are truly defined, i.e. C infinity, within the material reality. Calculus is the best approximation that we have, but it's nevertheless a pure form, right? So calculus gives us the answer in a pure form version. Reality is not pure forms, right? So that's basically why we can't say it's a phase space, because what's a phase space? Well, it's something where on some level, the axioms of a vector space apply. And we can use the axioms of a vector space. We can play around with vectors. We can use vectors as metaphors for our understanding, but we have to also accept that in real reality, we have this thing called the uncertainty principle, which gives a fine grain, a certain granularity to reality that makes the operations defining calculus, when you go to do them, if you were going to go to do them on a system, they would actually affect the system. So if measuring a system changes the system, the measurement you got no longer represents the system, because the fact of taking the measurement changed the system, so that what my system does is incorporates this fact into its reasoning and does the logic on a level that basically doesn't care that this is a factual part of the universe. So I don't know, Gandalf, if you feel like you understand the thought process behind the quantum exclusion stuff, or if it's just Greek at this point.
It's just Greek that feels logical to me. Like, it makes sense in the sense that it seems like something which is a plausible explanation. Do I fully understand the explanation? No, because I'm still sort of just coming back to this stuff. If that provides you a better idea of where I stand with this.
Since you've been gone, Week in Review has basically reverted to Doooovid pontificating and Jennifer giving math lessons. So you come back and it's like straight, like Jennifer hitting you with an explanation of some physics math phenomenon and like, what do you think? And you're like, huh? Awesome. But like, it's hard to, that's why, we're going to push forward to like publishing a book, or, Doooovid, the Jew in me, the Baal Shem Tov, says, how do you know whether, a Torah, a piece of wisdom is true? It says, if it helps you understand something else. So immediately, okay, Jennifer told you something which you could kind of pigeonhole as like, okay, that's some interesting like physics explanation of some astronomical phenomenon that I've basically never thought about. In my opinion, makes absolutely no difference on, but very nice. Like, even if you are completely right, I have no knowledge to verify it, and if you were wrong, I would have no way to prove you wrong. But like, that's the state of Week in Review, because that's what we do. But
wait, hold on a second. The track record of Jen is pretty good, so I verify it because, well, her explanations for these things every time I've investigated them myself and fully been able to understand them, or were pretty much flawless on these subjects when it comes to physics.
Yeah, I mean, so good for you to say, okay, you could trust her now, her physics explanations. But like, at the end of the day, like, when's the last time you enrolled in a course in like astrophysics? Like never, probably never will. But you could value something that's useful information, or you could verify like, wow, this person appears to have a certain level of expertise on this useful information. The greater theory on consciousness I've been advancing. You watched my speed reading video?
Yeah, way back in the day, yeah.
So I mean, you remember the chunking theory?
Yes, the chunking theory. I sort of agree with it.
Yeah, so the concept is that you should only be able to hit like 500 to 800 words a minute tops, based on the science measurement of brain activities. Short-term memory only could hold 7 plus or minus 2 items at a time, and the saccades, or whatever, the eye movement, how quickly a person could take in one chunk of information, and you could cap that off, and to say it doesn't make sense that a person should be able to read more than about high 100 words per minute. However, a lot of speed reading people claim they could read much faster, and there's anecdotal evidence of people like Doooovid who could apparently speed read and be tested on it and appear to have high comprehension without the decrease in comprehension. And the theory is chunking, and I go in my speed reading video that basically people stop learning as kids, like to put letters into words, and then words into phrases, phrases into sentences, sentences into paragraphs. But the same structure that a kid learns to read when they're younger, they could form bigger and bigger chunks their whole life and read quite quickly. But this idea of a chunk, what is a chunk? And in consciousness, so say a chunk is a chunk of information, like a block. So, it's a Gandalf. I don't have to waste 7 different chunks on the Gandalf. I could just use one chunk for Gandalf, or even Gandalf White 2. I could take in with one chunk and don't have to use 3 words, or maybe even a whole paragraph like that. But on a neural level, like, what is this chunk? So like Jennifer, at some point, like what she drew didn't have to do anything necessarily with the formation of planets and astronomy. It's basically a mathematical physics concept, but the concept is directly relevant to many physical processes. It's kind of like Noam Chomsky in his like brain mentalese, some of the precursor to language, what language is in the brain before it gets transferred to a language that a lot of people have rejected. But they kind of like, so if Jennifer gave you an interesting piece of wisdom that had multiple different levels on how to understand spheres or the different flows, that created a new chunk for you, and then that chunk that was just put in your head will allow you to process similar pieces of information in a superior way. So if you're looking, okay, Jennifer just taught you something interesting, that's a new chunk. If it's like a chess move, like an opening, like I just learned a new chess trick. If a person plays into this various opening line, I know what to do and I'll get an easy victory. But it's only going to work if the person plays into the exact line, versus kind of the theory of I learned a new pattern, and this pattern might occur in 10% of games. So, 10% of games, this new pattern I learned, I might be able to use in my games and score better. So, that's the physical process of how that would work. The intuitive mental understanding, like Gandalf is a high IQ individual, could probably intuitively understand what Doovid's saying just from my explanation right now.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I do understand what you're saying. I mean,
so you could see your own mind working in a certain way when you could see your own mind thinking. Me and Jennifer have been meditating and are Hindus for decades, or period. But even you are trained enough to see your own mind, where you could say, yeah, that's kind of what happens when I'm thinking, and I could see that it's some sort of, I could even say like a Platonic form, because I'm still arguing in favor of dualism. That I'm saying maybe the chunk doesn't actually exist in the material realm. Maybe the chunk is a phenomenon in the spiritual realm, like a Platonic form, or you're going to say a chunk is simply some sort of pattern of neural activities, and the neural firing for one thing could be the same neural firing for a whole bunch of activities, or it could be more complicated through quantum phenomenon, that chunking doesn't occur at the neural level, it occurs at the quantum level.
Well, I think we can probably make your theory work in tandem with mine as long as you define a chunker and a chunk. Because I guess I would put axioms more or less on the same level as that which chunks, and then thoughts would be the chunks themselves. And then you could introduce a hierarchy wherein you would striate the hierarchy based on how complex each thought was, right? Like to go through a theory requires more focus than to look at a flower, for example.
I had a total grug thought because just a meme came to my mind as we were saying this, an image of Doovid's chunky mental soup. And it could be like a soup can, and you have like some of the shapes in the soup can represent like some of your ideas. I don't know why. And then there's a picture of Doovid on the soup can. I don't know why that image just popped into my head as soon as you said that. It's just like what
Campbell's chunking soup.
Well, it's interesting because I'm the one who actually believes in free will, but the model that you and Church of Entropy and Gandalf had that doesn't, so to say, have free will suits better with chunking. That basically you have this set of chunks available to you, and there's some sort of process that when new information or new decision that comes in front of you, and like if you're thinking like moving the chess studies that I covered on my channel, but for any information, just like recognizing a person's face or trying to mentally map out the spatial structure of a room, that you have these precursors in your mind. You're like, is it a square? Is it a rectangle? And they're kind of floating there. And if you call it like a free will decision, you choose which chunk to use, but you have these precursor pre-made chunks that you choose from, or that is not a free will process, that there's some determinative process that just gives you this chunk. So Gandalf didn't go through a conscious free will process to think about soup cans. It's just whatever we're talking about when it hit a chunk and how he's trying to process this information, that's what it paired up with in his brain. And so he just kind of spit that out. But, presumably that's how consciousness works. And you could see how there could be free will or how there could not be free will, that there could be a process where, Gandalf had an ability like, soup can, should I bring that to the forefront of my mind, or should I let it go back to the mind and let something else come to the forefront of my mind, and that it's some sort of free will process that went through? Or you could say there's absolutely no free will involved, that there's just forces to control a person's mind, and the person themselves can't actually control those. And because I play this chess game called Crazy House, we'll call those the voices in our head. And the question, do we have free will to choose which voice in our head we listen to? Or, in Gandalf or Church of Entropy's model is that that's not actually how it works. There's just some battle of forces, and then one voice becomes dominant, and that leads to action.
Well, the thing is that I just want to know why you think these two. I think maybe what's going to happen is that we're going to realize over time that we were talking about different things when we were referring to this free will thing, and that actually we did agree, we just had a different definition of the term. And I think it's like a mystical mystery almost, because it's like, well, am I actually able to be independent in some sense? And then it's like, well, what does it mean to be independent? And then we come up against this reality that we live in a deterministic universe, but then we have to contend with this uncertainty thing where it's not actually predetermined. Like, you cannot determine the future state of a system knowing its original points, because the system, as soon as it makes the quantum state transition, you have multiple states potentially that it could transition into with a corresponding statistical probability. So I think it is possible that we're going to be able to work this uncertainty idea into the workings of consciousness and actually be able to isolate what we mean when we say free will. And I think that it's the holding time between conception and waveform reduction, right? Because, like, imagine you're picking out your clothes and you're just looking at all your different clothes and you haven't decided yet. That's the first step of it. And then when you decide what you're going to wear, that's the waveform reduction. You're going from multi-state to single state, right? So the question is, how much time can you be suspended between the multi-state and the single state? I think that is your proxy for what we call free will.
If you're looking at debate, so any topic, and let's say it's politics, Trump or Biden, and from a logical view, you can say, okay, Trump, here's a long list of positive things that would be good for him. Here's a long list of negative things bad for him. And so with Biden, the same thing. Here's a list of issues, and here are the candidates' opinions on the issue and other factors for some sort of called the truth discovery function. If you wanted to put it to the computer, who's the better man, Trump or Biden, and the computer through some algorithm will create a weight and value for various things and try to mathematically determine that. And for a model how the mind goes about it, and then if you're in a debate, the issue comes up, and it's kind of like chess. That's why I'm doing my stream. I mean, I'm a chess player naturally, but why I'm streaming on chess, where it's like you have a whole bunch of different options, and all of those options release a whole bunch of more options, which in turn release a whole bunch of more options. And chess is kind of like debate, where I'm going to make a move and I'm going to have to hand it over to the other person and see what they do, and then they're going to hand it back to me. In response to what they do, I'm going to do something back. So debate is like that also, but also like this template chunking type theory, where it's like, okay, here's my time to give my argument, and maybe to my head immediately pops 100 different possibilities, and you try to limit it down to 3 possibilities and organize and structure it. And that's kind of why I'm playing chess, to sharpen my mind for debate, so I could say maybe I could do that instantaneously, as opposed to a book, where it's saying like, oh, me and Jennifer are going to come out with books, and that's not going to be some instantaneous calculation. that's something we're going to spend, we've already spent years, and we're going to spend years more, and it's going to try to have some sort of super structure where it was a long determinative process of what's the best structure to organize this information. And 2 years now almost, and you're saying like free will, all the debates that we've had on this issue, one of the most talked about issues, like reincarnation may be different things, but free will is probably one of the largest issues we've talked about it. And there's still not much resolution, and then it's still kind of like maybe we agree, maybe we disagree.
Oh, wait, there's not much resolution.
Maybe we're not defining the terms right.
Doovid,
I think what Doovid means is that nobody's really changing their mind.
Oh, okay.
Well, when we say we have a hunch and intuition, so you say, okay, what's the evidence? What do we know how we were? So there's the power introspection of I introspect and I observe myself, and I have an estimation of how I myself operate. Therefore, based on that, I could extrapolate general rules from how I've introspected about my own consciousness. And that's usually the largest factor. Then you could be a scholar where you've read literature, you could have spoken to people, you could try to assess what's going on in other people's heads, even if they don't speak to you or tell you what's going on in their heads. And I was saying also kind of like chess could be like a precursor to mind reading. If you believe in psychokinesis theories or understandings and these various things, but the simple process of what goes on when a person operates and does simple day-to-day activities is actually huge amounts of uncertainty. So you have a working theory, and then just we'll try to explain how a person goes about their day-to-day operation, that the uncertainty is so high that basically any theory will instantly break down.
Well, I think my theory is pretty good because it's so general. I don't think anybody can really argue against that subjectivity is the imposition of an I am on the consciousness, and that the primary exigencies of this I am is to seek out safety and social climbing in some sense.
And social climbing within a set of cults or related cults in which the prestige available matches their inertial NPC drive.
Well, this is where the distinctions come out, right? Like by having this unified sameness, you can understand you can contextualize the differeces, because the way they're looking at it now in other fields is they're just saying, oh my God, this question is too big to answer, so we're going to wallpaper over it with randomness, chaos. But it's like, no, there's something shared to consciousness, but then between individuals, what they identify as objects of safety or objects of merit, that may vary tremendously based on a number of factors. So that's where your differentiation comes in. And it makes the differences, I think, more rich, because by acknowledging the sameness, you sort of get past that perceptual hump that a lot of people struggle with, where they want to either assert something special about their human consciousness, or they want to have a freedom to define consciousness. But you find very quickly that if you choose the wrong definition, then a bunch of other words stop making sense or concepts stop making sense. You pretty much have to fundamentally axiomatize consciousness in some way that is not antagonistic to the flow of nature.
Yes, didn't we had mentioned earlier in a private conversation that Kurt Doolittle had tried to define consciousness on his page the other day. I think you and I had mentioned that, and he's talking about something to do with brains and Aspies as like the most primary or best form of consciousness or something.
I don't remember that one. The one I'm thinking of right now is the woo-woo one.
Oh, the woo-woo one, yes.
Which I thought was a subtle dig at myself and people who feel similarly to me. But I think he's basically going down the JF Keith Wood's route of, oh, well, I'll take a crack at consciousness. It's like historical research. History shows us that even the best and brightest struggled to A, transcend a consciousness, B, situate it within an enlightened state, and C, explain it to other people. And C is pretty hard to do. So to think that you can just come in as a novice, completely uninitiated, and say something that may A, makes sense, or B, is worth anything is pretty, it sort of betrays that you haven't really done a historical study. So, yeah, I don't know.
That's the point of the Mayavadi, or like, of course, because the person's soul is sourced from God and God is all powerful. So even everybody does, like, yes, I know consciousness. I have a soul. My soul comes from God also. So that's the nature of that causes that phenomenon that people will just blurt out and be like, I have the answer to this, obviously. Like, I have a soul also.
Yeah, Super Librix syndrome, right?
Well, yeah, but I was saying there's a certain, like, yes, I mean, it's predicted that that's going to be the case. It's not weird that people do that. It's like, well, it's obvious people do that.
Well, it's counterintuitive because of projection, but if you understand it on a more metaphysical, rational level, yeah, that's exactly what the formula predicts, that ascending into a higher state of consciousness requires multiple changes of state. And when a person starts an ascension process, they have no meaningful way to distinguish between the ascended states, the multiple ascended states, and easily mistake one for the other, right? Like I'm seeing that insight is being mistaken for transcendental wisdom.
Well, I would say it's the beneficence of maybe you or the guru, spiritual figure in general, that allows that experience to happen, because the guru gives the person the benefit of the doubt that maybe they're enlightened. So the guru, if they're enlightened, it's usually guru or swami means one who can control their senses. Generally, like Goswami, I think literally translates to that who could control senses. But it comes from hard work, and so someone who's mastered their senses knows the work and austerities they had to go through to do that. But if you meet a new person and you assume through the benefit of the doubt that maybe they've carried out those austerities, they've developed the impulse control, self-control, or enlightenment and touch with God, and that actually could cause the person to have a sense of their soul that they usually don't have, because the guru gave the person the benefit of the doubt and saw them as the spirit soul that they actually were, even though the person themselves did not see themselves that way. That allowed that, like, so in Judaism, they'd call it, like, the spark, the, Pintel and Neshama, the spark of the Jewish soul, but from just the pure science of the soul, because you recognize the God in the person, and the person was like, well, if God is in me, let me tell you all the answers. So even from that perspective, like the King Solomon, a wise man learns more from a fool than a fool from the wise man. Sometimes the wise man could say, God answers my questions through what fools tell me. And that, saying that, okay, this person, if through my spiritual work, I elicited them to feel their soul enough so that they're like, you're no better than me, because the soul that I have comes from the same God that gives you the soul. And you're saying, well, yeah, of course, obviously. But the person wasn't enlightened enough to carry themselves on all times, all levels like that. That it was just a unique phenomenon when they're in the presence of a spiritual master, that they're realizing it, that's what causes them to blurt out, like, oh, I have all the answers to all the questions. But you actually, sometimes they do have answers to the question, and saying that, the guru could say, like, actually, that was the answer I was looking for. Thank you.
Yes, the verbal diarrhea thing. Many such cases. I don't know. I think it's because people are unconvinced of their own beliefs, and they want to come and try to convince me as if that will somehow bolster them. But I mostly just take questions and provide further illustrations.
Saying, like, you see the God within the person, even if they don't see it within themselves.
I think the way I would describe it is that I would say that within every person who's unenlightened, there's the
The
potential
potential to be
light.
enlightened, even if the person themselves doesn't realize they have the potential to be enlightened. So they recognize that you believe that they have the potential to be enlightened, even though they themselves don't believe they have the potential to be enlightened. And that's what causes like the blurting Mayavadi phenomenon.
Yeah, the dissonance sort of causes, because like when you're in a dissonant state, the quality of your consciousness drops drastically, right? Like it's going from non-survival threat mode to like adjacent survival threat mode. So it's going to put all the energy into the states that it senses are associated with its immediate survival. So that's sort of something I keep coming back to, is like, how do I avoid people in the dissonant state? But once they're in the Mayavadi state, that's like worse than the dissonant state. So I guess I'm trying to like avoid the dissonant state in the first place. But once they're in the Mayavadi, like verbal diarrhea, blurt a bunch of stuff out, tell me I'm crazy stage, it's like, I'm not going to get through to them.
Okay, so let's map this out now. Like Doooovid's here, Gandalf is back. So let's figure out what's going on. I'm not going to grill Gandalf yet unless he's ready for it, because it's like seeing the dentist. Like, you're there to get drilled and you're going to feel better afterwards, but like no one voluntarily wants to get like a root canal. But like,
That's a good
like
quote.
Gandalf is here for Doovid to give a root canal. It's like, God forbid. But
actually, it's more like a psychoanalysis, but fair enough.
But let's map this out, because maybe like you need like the warm up with Jennifer, and like I'll take some medicine, and I have an eggplant parmesan I ordered from the local Jerusalem pizza that I could heat up, and maybe I'm not sure. Like, are you back? You're streaming, or you're just here tonight? You might bounce in like 10 minutes, and we're going to see you for months. Or are you saying like you're back, you're around, you're going to be here even tonight? You're going to be around a while.
Yeah, I'm going to be around a while. I mean,
so let me give you and Jennifer just time to, if that makes sense. Like, I'll take some medicine, make some food, be back in like 10 minutes, and then listen another like 5-10 minutes while I eat, and and then maybe like the good cop, bad cop. Like Jennifer will be the good cop, and then I'll come back in 20 minutes, and Doovid will be the bad cop.
Okay, you can be the bad cop, and I promise I won't do any Gandalf spurgs on you.
Well, we'll see. No, I'm just saying, like, I was telling Jennifer, like, I mean, you could probably go right back into being a regular. I'm not too into politics. Like, I didn't even really care to talk about Trump, but like, yeah, I mean, Luke Halsey, you could probably go back into that if you want to talk about streaming. Like, you're a smart enough guy, you could understand quite a bit about what me and Jennifer are saying, even without a higher level background in mathematics, and we appreciate that. So we're glad you're back. So does that make sense to you, Jennifer?
Sure. We'll
Okay.
talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon after your food and medicine break.
So yeah, Gandalf, maybe you could talk a little bit about the spiritual side of moving out of the city and what it's been like. Anything happened that was unexpected, or just maybe give us a bird's eye view of that experience?
Well, I'll tell you what. I had no idea that, I guess part of the reason, just my own, maybe even streaming inconsistency in years past, is living in the city is, especially under these conditions, is much more stressful than you realize. And you only really realize that when you escape the city. Like, under current social, cultural, political, demographic, and economic conditions, the city living right now is pretty terrible. And just to have quiet, where the only thing noisy in your neighborhood is the rustle of the rush of the wind and the rustling of the leaves as the wind blows through on a fall day. Like, as opposed to when I lived in the city, cars honking, even lots of people just hanging out at the park, just nonstop kind of paranoia and a pall of fear because of lockdowns and riots. I don't have to deal with any of that anymore. And a year of that in 2020 was that was enough to just send me over the edge. And it's like, I got to get out of here. And it took a couple months to get out, but there's a piece about living with nature. There's a piece about having a lot of quiet. It's such that, I'll probably never go back to like high density urban living ever again. And it feels so good to know that that's probably going to be my future.
Yeah, you can take the man out of the survival strategy, but you can't take the survival strategy out of the man. I think about, my own dad whose family's living in a pretty rural area, just a little, I don't know what you'd even call it, colony, maybe 4,000 people. And it was pretty farm centric, community centric. And then growing up near Montreal and then eventually just moving farther and farther out into the country. I don't think he can quite admit to himself that it's because of his roots that he wants to do this, but it obviously informs that people are just going to feel better when the environment reflects their selection strategy or whatever you want to call it, survival strategy. So there's like a, what do you call it? A momentum of expectations with regards to what civilization ought to look like. And it's subconscious, but we sort of have a feeling when it's not working out the way it's supposed to. Just the same way we have a feeling when what we're living in is an improvement, i.e., closer to that ideal framework or architecture, or whatever you want to call it, that we sense on some level society ought to have. We're in virgin territory, though. Like, there's never been this many people alive before. There's never been this much cities. There's never been this much concentration of population in cities. So really, it's if people were feeling anything other than confused, it would be surprising, because where would you possibly have learned to deal with such a situation?
That, and I think there's the dynamic of commerce in the city nowadays is such that the social behaviors that you need that are incentivized in order to achieve wealth and power within the political and economic ecosystem of, say, a large Democrat-run American city are such that you basically have to be a crab in a bucket, stabbing everyone in the back to get to the next rung of social prestige or status. So they're environments that aren't conducive to building community as a result.
So have you run into any of these Mayavadi type idiots? Like, I guess Kurt is kind of one of these people because he thinks he has some unique insight on natural law, a laughable proposition, but he's not so much into the woo-woo of it. In fact, his stupid article seems to suggest he's anti-woo. But I guess I consider his idiotic dissertations and, nonsensical axioms to be pretty wooish, but I suppose it's a matter of opinion.
Well, as we all know, some opinions are better than others.
Yeah, so his conclusion is, so that is why people like me or Josha Bach are demonstrating the new model of thought that means an understanding of neural networks is as important to the soft sciences as math is to the hard sciences. Yeah, so I would put this in the category of fundamentally inaccessible.
I don't think Kurt understands any of those components to brain science. When I figured out what he couldn't understand vis-a-vis Carl Schmitt, it's like everything he does is just mid-wit tier copy pasta. And the people that follow Kurt are the kind of proto-Mayadavi types or whatever, because they love the autistic word puzzles that whose reference to reality is, well, questionable.
Well, I had a convo with one in DMs. I think he's like tangential to the Poopertarians, but he was saying like, well, is the universe infinite? I'm like, well, it's not something we can know due to how small we are. All we can say for sure is that it's very large and it might be infinite, but it might not be. We just can't find the boundary, and it may not even make sense to define a boundary without understanding that the boundary changes because of quantum state exclusion, which creates new space and new time-like observables, and also the annihilation process of a dead star, where it goes back to the primordial state, is, taking all that into consideration. Yeah. I didn't really see the point to a distinction between an infinite and a finite universe that's very large, but that was like so important to him that he's like, no, I'm not going to accept anything you're saying because I don't accept your answer, or something along those lines. And it was like, it's pretty dumb to say you know something for sure when you know actually that you can't know it for sure. I mean, it's a bit dishonest. And also, I think it's dishonest to claim that it really matters whether the universe is infinite or not, because I cannot see why it matters.
Well, related questions seem to matter to other people with whom I've had these kind of conversations. I reposted in another forum your article about the Big Bang being bullshit. And one person literally in the comment thread had a psychotic break and blocked a couple people because he couldn't stand that we were questioning the Big Bang consensus.
Yeah, it's the whole, Miss Science, I fucking love science. Why don't you love science as much as I do, you heathen type thing, transposing of Christian moral black and whiteness onto the science paradigm, which is basically why you get all these like insane assertions like Super Librix devotees making arguments that if someone denies climate change, then they're a bad person and their opinion should be censored. I'm like, I think you're supposed to wait to impose the draconian authoritarianism till after you take power. But I mean, it creates such a pathetically constrained echo chamber that once you start to think in the more unified, integral, take your pick way, that all these little subfields are really shown for just how truly little they are.
I would agree with that. Why do you think there seems to be that we're moving in this space where, say, 4 years ago, whether on the Chans or in these circles, what was happening with Donald Trump was like so important, and what was going on with the politics that everyone sees was so important. Now we're at a phase 4 years later where poll is nothing but like a theological war about Christianity or Christianity versus paganism, or different even kinds of pagan beliefs versus each other. And the kind of arguments that are being advanced increasingly have this neo-Vedantic tier because everyone's looking for some autistic explanation for some kind of religious dogma. Because all these people know that secularism, as we've understood, it's been a disaster, but they're just in this phase where all of them think they have some sort of bright idea. What do you make of the fact that the zeitgeist has moved in this direction and where it might be moving?
It's an interesting pattern to observe because it sort of shows that there's a current of energy that is ornery or disquieted on a quest of some sort. And I think ultimately it's a quest of answering the question of who and what am I. And so 4chan allows you the rare opportunity to have the void speak back to you, right? So we situated amidst a backdrop of existing karmas, which include a very fundamental level, the individualism LARP, right? So you go through the logic of individualism and you realize at some stage that there's actually no such thing as individualism the way you would intuitively think of individualism, i.e. that it's possible to have original anything or to create something novel, truly novel. This is not actually real. It's kind of like the whole égalité, fraternité, LARP. Individualism is something that sounds really great because like what's bad about having control over yourself and your environment and make exactly what you want if it doesn't affect anyone else badly? Well, how the hell do you know? Because you're not in a position to judge what's good for yourself / the let alone the remainder of civilization. and I'm actually not even referring to anybody in particular right now. There's so many people that fit this profile. Essentially, people want to go from an is to an ought, right? Because that informs your position within the social hierarchy. If you can go from is to ought on all levels, you're the monkey at the top, because the other monkeys actually want you to be at the top, because they're all looking at you to inform their identity, which is the fundamental harmonic of the subjective consciousness, predicted to be the most important facet. So the purpose on this level that's happening is a metaphysical self-discovery, an unmaking of the illusion of individuality, as well as a re-embracing of the traditional modality of debate, which is why through various means I've been able to shoehorn the conversation into forcing people to ask progressively more challenging questions about the nature of consciousness, the nature of information, the nature of knowledge, but mostly it is at the level of theological debate right now, because that's the easiest one to maintain your social pecking order position, right? So we have to understand people as being rather brittle and fragile and clinging to these illusions about themselves, like individuality and like social standing. So the art really comes in and presenting the ideas in such a way that people can embrace them without perceiving a threat to their social standing. I mean, objectively, is there really such a thing? Well, yeah, but it's abstract, but it doesn't so much matter what's the, divine abstract reality. What matters is what the person individually perceives. And these threats, as we could see with the example Gandalf just gave of somebody, and I witnessed this, and it was really, like, I would call it a breakdown in the sense that if I had displayed emotion publicly in such manner that I would have shame as a result, right? So it's certainly not unprecedented, and I think that the truth is that it's scary to know about what's real, because it means letting go of all the stuff that's not real, including LARPs like individualism and so on and so forth. So not everyone's going to get to that, final level of realization of the unironic Mayavadi actually feeling the unification of your own consciousness with divine consciousness. They're going to stay on some lower level, but they're still going to virtue signal the abstract order hierarchy, which means they're going to want to be seen to have the best arguments. They're going to want to be seen to dominate the debates, even if they're not actually on the deeper inner experience level seeking the answers for their own the answers just for their own purpose. Like, what did you say? Truth for its own sake. Very few people are seeking that, as it inspires a great fear. But they're
the joy of figuring things out.
Yeah.
That's the book about Richard Feynman, The Joy of Figuring Things Out.
And that's an experience that I think that only people with a certain karma can really relate to, because for most of us, it's just the joy of feeling cool relative to other people who are approximately at the same coolness level as us. And because we're all just sort of biological robots mimicking each other's behavior to some extent, that signaling can easily create cross wires. Like, due to projection, you interpret other people's signaling as meaning the same thing that it means when you do it, when actually they're just interested in going as high as they can up the monkey tree without the risk of getting clunked on the head. Whereas for us, it's like, I've been clunked on the head so many times, I've, reincarnated with like a steel cranium type deal. I don't care if you clunk me in the head and get mad or whatever. I'm going to the top of the knowledge tree. It's just that the lady can't see the difference between the top of the knowledge tree and the top of the social hierarchy tree, because for them, it's an abstract thing they don't even acknowledge is real. They don't acknowledge that they're doing it, because to acknowledge it would admit the just how primitive the behavior is. And that's another part of the illusion, is that we want to believe we're significantly more complex on some levels than we actually are. So welcome back, Doooovid. I was just giving Gandalf. I hope that wasn't too long of an explanation, but I thought the question sort of justified a bit of a monologue, because it's confusing, but I want to get the point across that there is a logic. It's just a logic that can feel at times counterintuitive.
No, I appreciate the explanation. I mean, I think these are complicated subjects, so they require.
It's good to do, because they're saying we want something that will stand up the rigorous standards of the academy. Not just the general public and the haters, but saying that that this
Wait,
will be
wait.
presented.
If the Academy had standards, I would push back. The Academy has almost no standards right now. We're doing higher standards here, so give yourself more credit.
Well, however you estimate it, that is saying that yes, the idea will be put forward in a formalized way that it could be debated among the Academy. What the current state of the Academy or what they do with it, that's their business. But I mean, the same way that the historic greats did works, wrote books, submitted papers to the Academy, whether it worked out good or not. I think me and Jennifer realized that, we'll have to go through that same process.
I actually don't see it that way because I don't think that they're thinking about things on the same level as us. So if they're interested in learning, they're going to have to learn directly from the source. I don't see
there
them
could be a
having any
cult.
insights.
There could be an associated cult and movement, like the book or something like that. So it's saying, like Newton, like a paper is there, the scientific community has the idea, they could do with it what as they wish. It's no longer yours. Like the idea is formulated in a way to the Academy that they have something useful that they could do without you. And that's the purpose of formally submitting, like a book, a paper, a formalized working copy of your theory, that someone with what you've submitted to them could use it to replicate results and not need to consult you.
Sure. Well, I guess on some level that's already been done because somebody took the measurement limit and won a space filler mathematical approximation contest with it. So yeah, the trivial aspects of it, the lemmas, if you will be able to be used immediately, which obviously has its own risks, etc., associated with it. But yeah, I just wanted to show on the screen some different interpretations that people had of the periodic table. So there have been a fairly large number of alternative versions of the periodic table that have been presented, but this is not the same thing as the unified field model that underscores it, right? Because these are all pretty pictures, but if you don't have an actual geometry, i.e. a model that explains and predicts why it looks the way that it does, it's just a LARP. It is a intellectual curiosity. And that's where, people aren't bridging that gap. They think knowledge is memorizing a series of facts and then reciting those facts at times where they feel that it's appropriate to do so. But the reality is that, the chunker is not the same as the chunk. You have to have the right axioms and you have to spend as much time as it takes to actually internalize the axioms. Because to say, like Claire Kaw claims to accept the causal axiom, but her argumentation strategy shows that she clearly doesn't, as she has foregone conclusions in all of her rhetoric. So it's one thing to pay lip service to causality, but it's another to actually accept what your basic geometry predicts about causality. So there's this enormous amount of time spent in this quasi-egotistical struggle with people where these breakdowns happen where they just can't see their way to accepting the axioms because it's causing dissonance on some other level of their personality.
Well, the regurgitation kind of hypothesis you gave here sort of reminds me of just what was the thing? Well, basically, how people just like to repeat what they seem to have as prestige around them, and this is just basically how schools function. When you have mass public schooling in this kind of environment, and you teach people this kind of memorize this so you can pull up this knowledge for later, what you're not doing is teaching people how to think so much as how to associate certain social cues with certain verbalized thought patterns that you give apparent adherence to in the name of increasing your position on the social ladder.
Just a note on what Jennifer said. I mean, the multiple truth hypothesis, you obviously will have multiple dualistic theories that are more in line with Doooovidism, However, the multiple truth hypothesis could have the same process that Jennifer's describing without ego. That, just saying the chunking theory, there doesn't need to be an I that has a manifested ego. It could just be the patterns that the person used previously to best understand information, because they had to make some pattern out of the information to get by. And generally, people are more likely to continue to use the same patterns, even if they're incorrect. So at a time where someone says, oh, these axioms, even if they're true, there's the
Doovid,
momentum.
sorry to interrupt you, but I think you should call that the principle of inertia.
Well, yeah, it's the inertia, it's the momentum of the false axioms. There doesn't need to be an ego. It's just you can't break the momentum of false axioms with true axioms. There has to be something to slow down the momentum on the false axioms for the person to all of a sudden subscribe to new axioms, even if they're better. So so to say, the system would crash and you would have nothing. If the person just collapsed and got rid of their false axioms, the likelihood that they would be able to correctly adopt the true axioms is close to zero.
Ah, the atheist fallacy. Very well put, Doovid.
Well, yeah, and saying it's even going to be like a vector field of differential equations, where it's like a force field, and you could have a dualistic system where there's an ego that operates from a separate spiritual realm, or you could have an egoistic system where within the unit, the being, that there's a ego within it that somehow acts as a force on it. Or you could have no internal central control force and just the external forces of nature acting on it. And so, that's the purpose of the multiple truth hypothesis, is to recognize that there's huge amounts of uncertainty, and any variation on any of these details would produce possibly vastly different predictions. So you need a multiple truth hypothesis model to make some sort of greater calculation about the type models you're using and the type predictions that they're making, versus the greater totality of all of the models in total and all of the predictions that all of the models in totality make in the range of those, to make some sort of estimation. And to even think that you could do that, and that you could make an estimation that would have value to, so to say, like a truth discovery, that through this process, this is determined to be true, or at least more true than other things.
Yeah, I absolutely love that we're gradually getting to the same place through different axioms. And, this is sort of the wondrous beauty of the theory, sort of. I don't want to say proving itself, because we all know it's not possible for something to prove itself within its own axioms, but at least give this demonstration where it's like, yeah, we started out at this sort of, not speaking for Doovid's theory, but my own theory. I mean, it's definitely gotten better. I don't want to say it was bad before, but it took me, time to sort of get to a point where I could explain it. But I feel like the conversation is growing, and that we sort of, whatever the irreconcilable differences that we thought we had, we've somehow sort of moved past them. Like, we're not coming back to Gödel theorem all the time, because I guess the arguments have been formulated in a way that we don't need to invoke Gödel anymore.
Oh, the Gödel theorem.
Well, it's the chunk. It's like Doovid and soup cans for Gandalf, but Gödel is the most common chunk that most people listening to us is like. If a person's actually educated, Gödel is the most likely chunk that is going to be brought to mind just from listening to us. And that's so a person who knows Gödel, and then you could enlighten them on some higher level. I mean, it was the debate I had with my outreach rabbis, where they said, would you rather do outreach to a Jew who knows absolutely nothing about Judaism, or outreach to a Jew who's caught up with rabbis of a different sect? And this rabbi was like, he'd rather do outreach to Jews who had no affiliation with other sects, although to some extent, there's outreach, people who specialize in getting people to switch sex or various things. But I think that these are general processes that, hopefully we're going to reduce to like an almost a mathematical form. And, even as saying, okay, like, I'm going to make these predictions and then we're going to take over the world and bring Messiah and rebuild the temple because I predicted it and have the equations exactly. But not saying just the joy of figuring things out and saying, I understand reality a little bit better. And you could have a LARP like a Mayavadi, like, no, I'm convinced that this understanding isn't something I figured out, but it's sourced within me because really God is within me because I am God. Ha ha ha. And but saying like, yeah, the model could predict that's reasonable religious theology.
Sorry
theory.
to interrupt you, but Gandalf says he's getting tired, so I just wanted to see if maybe there was something he wanted to say before he said goodnight. And it looks like someone in the chat wants to come on. I can't tell if it's a troll or not. They sent me an email that doesn't seem like they're a troll, so I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. But if they are a troll, I will just temporarily mute the stream, play another video, and start another hangout call, so there will be almost troll proof. So go ahead, Gandalf.
I just wanted to say thanks for having me on for the last hour or so. It was good. It's good to be back in the streamosphere, and I'm starting to get my legs under me again, so to speak. Oh, I forgot. I did one stream. Last thing we can review. Did one stream predicting the election with Claire Carr. So that was the one stream I did this week, other than we can review. But that's kind of not relevant for neither here nor there. I mean, politics isn't as important as metapolitics and especially physics. So anyway, take care, everybody. Thanks for having me. Look forward to doing some streams in the future about science, philosophy, and culture going forward.
All right, yeah, great to have back. Maybe next week we talk straight kind of streaming and plotting and planning. Like who, when, where.
Yeah. So we could talk about your book. So just in terms of a general structure.
I think Gandalf had it in him tonight to, kind of like figure out like his return streaming personality to like if he does get back into it, to figure it out. So, we'll see if he could figure it out, and then maybe you'll see Gandalf back around on various streams.
Yeah, I mean it's
but he's gonna have to figure out a personality that works, and he may it may not work. The personality he's planning on using might be, so to say, a dud, and it's not gonna work. And so he might, like if he could recreate himself in a way that works, it'll be good. If he can't, like he can't in it's kind of like chess, where like it's a game. There's a winner and a loser. There's a finality to it. So streaming, show business, or whatever, like they put you out there, and people either like you or they don't. So there's somewhat of a finality to it. So like if Gandalf does come back, we could discuss a strategy, and then we'll put him out there. And if people like him, he'll probably keep doing it. If people don't like him, he probably won't keep on doing it.
Yeah. Well, he seems to have jumped right back into it, so good for him. I hope it all goes very positively. But yeah, I'm just wondering what % of your book you think you should devote to a historical review. You think 30 is too much? Because I think some people will just skip it, even though they shouldn't, because it will make a lot more sense if they read it. But what do you think?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, you probably have to have a series of books over a period of time. The first one, you could just have a forward historical review, and that probably wouldn't be more than like 40 pages tops, and it might even only be 5-10 pages. Although, like multiple truth hypothesis, I might have like 2 or 3 sections. Like the first section might be of foundations, like a ABC, and then chapters, and then that might have like cognitive dissonance, multiple universe, and the geological theory of multiple working theories, and truth discovery, which would each have a historical perspective, but these would be current ideas on the market that are going to be part of a working multiple truth hypothesis. And so I would probably lay those out with at least a brief historical overview. But I was saying, if it's going to be like JF and I'm going to aim for a 200-page book, like cognitive dissonance, you could write a 200-page book on the historical overview of cognitive dissonance. But, saying you could also do a 2-page historical overview. So, I could have a 15-page chapter on cognitive dissonance, and it might not even be that. It could be a 5-page chapter on cognitive dissonance. And, but like I have in my videos, there's going to be certain precursor knowledge and the metaphysical framework of it. And I might bring some Aristotle and Talmud or something here and there, or splice it in, or footnotes. You have to think about that. But as of now, the things to look forward, and I'll ramble a little bit more than Jennifer will give her perspective on how she might organize her book, or thoughts on these type things of how long, or footnotes, or various things. But so the first section will be an overview of current working theories that are going to be part of the larger multiple truth hypothesis. Then would probably be a second section. It probably have 3 sections. The second section would probably be more complicated, and that would include parts on the theoretical computer program to discover truth, and what truth discovery would look like if you were capable to program a computer to discover the truth, like a machine learning, artificial intelligence algorithm at the current state of technology. If so to say, IBM or Google decided this was the most important project and dedicated all their supercomputers to it now, to your projections in the future, and the structure that it looks like AI will use to go about this thing called truth discovery. So that might be technical. So I would have to think if I would just make the second section like very technical, or if I would just maybe wouldn't have any technical. Then also I might have a section on chess. Like maybe I would leave chess out. Chess, because really, like, chess is one of the most well-studied things, and that's Doooovid. Like, I'm a chess player, so I might include a section on that, and then I would try to lay out a mathematical, logical form of the multiple truth hypothesis, and try to put it into ordinary differential equations, like a logical form. I would probably lay out multiple forms of mathematical logical structures of the multiple truth hypothesis that might be even worded as equations, where like the somehow like, and actually Jennifer's helping me out with that, but that also could be quite technical, and be a question whether just be kind of like, okay, like you got to assume the person has a comfortable knowledge of differential equations, or you're just going to try to explain concepts or at different levels with it. But you'll probably want to include, the second section is going to be hardcore science and math, but it probably in a chapter format. There might be an introduction in the first few pages that is also kind of like historical, larger framing picture, that even a person skips the rest of the chapter will have an idea of the type of rigorous science mathematics that I'm proposing, and then a third closing section that would be implications of the theory, current predictions, and things that the multiple truth hypothesis could be used to understand, that are not well understood, but that I would propose that a working model of the multiple truth hypothesis could be used as a framework to understand this. And then a section which might be the leading for like a whole nother book. So the multiple truth hypothesis book would probably just have a a chapter in the section about the implications towards the solution of a hard problem of consciousness, and also a section on implications for spiritualism, Freemasonry, dualism type esoteric ideas that so if a person wasn't interested in that, it would just be a chapter in the end of the book that the majority of the book would be purely science and math, but there would be a section at the end that would show how the multiple truth hypothesis is really designed to understand spiritual subjects and dualistic concepts of working with so to say equations in the spiritual realm corresponding to equations in the material realm, in some sort of interaction between those series of equations. And
you're thinking like an intro, which is the history, and then a treatise on science and a treatise on religion, which will probably have some subsections illustrating various facets, and then maybe at the end like a unifying chapter where you're saying, well, actually there's this transcendent sort of truth that goes through science and religion, and multiple truth hypothesis is part of the answer to that.
Well, I mean, multiple truth hypothesis is going to be the theme of the book without any implications, like a directing, like it's going to be by me, so it's going to have my bias, but it's going to be laid out as a scientific theory, as a framework and method that people could use to understand things that were previously difficult to understand, by creating them a framework to work with multiple competing ideas at the same time. And so it's in the forward introduction, we'll have a history of attempts, historical. So like I'm saying, from my knowledge, nobody has proposed such a thing. So I'm going to go over historically the ideas that are similar, saying like the multiverse, the working with multiple hypotheses concurrently, cognitive dissonance, these various things that have concepts very similar to the multiple truth hypothesis. But then I will be claiming that this multiple truth hypothesis is actually much greater, in that it combines the element in all these other theories into a greater metaphysical framework to understand reality. So, but the first part, so the forward and introduction will give a history of such attempts and ideas, and may just be very short, or maybe tens of pages, and then the first section will jump into I guess there'll be a forward and an introduction. So the forward will have like the history. The introduction will more be, I'll start to explain what is the multiple truth hypothesis. And then the first section will be current scientific theories that have an element of the multiple truth hypothesis already in it, like the multiverse and truth discovery and various other things that they'll have to determine, cognitive dissonance definitely. And then the second section will have a scientific presentation of the multiple truth hypothesis, where I actually lay out the theory in mathematical form, and where I try to actually demonstrate its use as a model of solving current models, and also like the computer program, as I said, the section on what would it look like if you program the computer in a hypothetical sense of the perfect computer, designed to search for what is truth. And then the concluding section is the implications of the theory. But within that, the second section, people have the theory, they can do it as they please. They no longer need Doovid. They have, like, so to say, if I lay out the series of differential equations, where here's a framework model where you could work with multiple competing theories at the same time and make some sort of mathematical calculation of the best path forward given the different outputs of the various competing models, that so to say, that's yours. That's the multiple truth hypothesis. The equations, hopefully they're going to work, and anybody who has access to the equations could immediately put them to use for their own purposes. But the conclusion of the book, I will draw of my own conclusions on, as I say, solving the hard problem of consciousness, implications in artificial intelligence, and spiritual in dualism. But the main thing, it's going to be multiple truth hypothesis, and I'm going to be giving over a theory that people, once they have it, even if they disagree with my conclusions, will have a model to work with multiple conflicting models that produce different results in a way to make better predictions.
Awesome. Yeah, so there was a question from Aiken Drum. Can you briefly explain to me why chunking is so important to you metaphysically when it, to me, is just a compression method? I'll let you answer that one first.
Well, because to me, I'm calling chunking a mental technique that I could teach people, and I believe it works because, like, okay, I coach chess, and I see people that get really, really good, and I see people that remain average, and I've seen people excel in different ways. Maybe you make a bunch of money, or go to good schools, and I believe in my mental technique, and like, I've read the scientific evidence and the various theories, and I'm already proposing my own theory on consciousness. So chunking is currently one of the best scientific theories out there on the market. It's not my idea. It's not my theory. Comes from Chase and Simon. I read it on my paper, 1973, and it's a study on chess that, like, some of the most well-known studies on consciousness were studies on chess players, but it was a 1973 study by Chase and Simon that comes up with this chunking theory. But this chunking theory is the best known method that we have now to explain the learning process, that we just form chunks, because the main basis of chunking is the working memory idea that you could only work with about 7 plus or minus 2 items in working memory. So a lot of tests, psychological, psychometric, brainwave, all the tests seem to indicate this physical limitation of working memory. But the belief is that you could work with 7 units of any size. So hence chunking. And then chunking is a method that matches neurology, that, like, it's like a chunk. I mean, Chase and Simon are actually, predate, they're back in 1973. There was some knowledge of neuroscience, but their ideas weren't mostly based on neuroscience. They were more based on psychometric studies. But chunking matches kind of the neurology understanding of how most neuroscientists believe the brain works, that there's a new experience, and that causes some sort of wiring between neurons. And then later, you don't have to relearn because the neurons have already been wired. So when something matching that experience happens, it fires in these already wired neurons, and that's what we refer to as a chunk.
Yeah, so if we want to look at this from a purely skeptical perspective, we can say, well, we don't have any good proxies for consciousness. The best proxy we can find is a computer. Therefore, whatever behaviors we can identify in computers, including chunking, must be something that has an analog in our own consciousness. But that's not enough to actually make the link. You have to go a step farther and say, well, let's look at the sheer speed of computations. Let's look at the field under computation, the entire perceptual field. Let's look at how much time it takes to make those identifications. And based on that time interval, we infer that it must be a finite order identification set, i.e., identifying one chunk amongst a set of finite chunks, which is piecing together this impression so darn quickly, because we don't think in a way that corresponds to a slower form of computation. So that's a stronger argument in support of Doovid's model. Is that actually proof? Well, it depends where you draw the line on a standard of proof. I think it's a good working hypothesis. But again, you have to sort of take into account at the back of your mind that it's just a model. And maybe the model works on some subset, and maybe it works for the whole thing, but we can't assume that just because it works for a subset that we can then infer that it works for the whole thing. And that's the difference between, just come back to what you were saying about truth discovery. I would draw a distinction between truth discovery and information discovery. Whereas information discovery is you give the computer some set of things, and then it optimizes something within those original conditions that you gave it. So those are the chunks. We chunk the computers. The computers at this point have no way of chunkering themselves. The computers can do whatever chunks we tell them to. They can optimize things faster than we can, i.e. the chess. You lose to the chess bot every time, but it can't take that step further back to the integrated stage and do what I would call truth discovery, because truth is something that is that which exists with it, whether or not we do. The computer has no way of knowing where it exists. It just knows how to do what we tell it to do. So I just thought it'd be maybe important to distinguish between information discovery, which is what computers are really good at, and truth discovery, which is what we're pretty shitty at, but computers are way shittier because we're always the ones telling the computers how to chunk. But we have our own chunking, which is a biological chunking, which is a thin slicing of the information that we have coming in through our sensory apparatus that we infer is drawing its information from archetypes which are finite in size, i.e. 6, 7, low cardinality number, and these are called the chunks, and that everything can sort of be thought of as something along the lines, something within the hierarchy of a fractal chunker. So the very basis at the very bottom is that which chunks, and then you have all the subsequent chunks. And you can have a hierarchy of chunks within it, but the chunker is different from the chunks. So does that work as a model for consciousness? Well, maybe, but it's certainly interesting because we haven't found anything structurally wrong with it yet. Like, I can't point to something in that theory and nail it to say, well, that's actually contradiction. It's totally wrong. You can't use it for this reason. That doesn't make it right. And that's the difference between the different standards of proof that one accepts. And those will vary based on who you ask.
Yeah, I think I'm going to get past, like the Bjerknes, Vince, Adam Green, kind of like they turn into rabbis. They want to be a counter-Semite, but first they have to explain what Judaism is in order to be a counter-Semite to explain why they're against it. So, really they're just like a rabbi, because at the end of the day, they, like, a lot of times they never even get to the counter-Semite point. They spend most of their time just explaining Judaism like a rabbi would. But for the multiple truth hypothesis, I'm explaining an idea that I disagree with in order to explain my own idea. But my own idea is relatively so complicated that you'll have an easier time understanding my idea if I explain to you one of the better current theories and why it's false. So, like Chase and Simon, 1973, chunking. This is a famous theory. There's other theories. I did a stream on my channel of, I read through a thesis, graduate thesis statement on, these various theories. I encourage people, if they're interested, to check it out or read some of the material. But chunking, has axioms that I disagree with. Chunking largely is based on tabula rasa, blank tablet, neural wiring structure of consciousness, that basically a person is born with very little wiring, and then when something is newly wired, that's a chunk. And that's not my understanding of consciousness. I'm basically a dualist. But I want people to get an understanding of the current models and why in the academy these, if you ask people in the academy who've actually read the books that supposedly answer these questions, which is very rare because most people in the academy don't even know what the people who the academy says know the answers to these questions wrote on the topic. But if you actually find a person in the academy that has read these books about what are supposed to be the answers to these questions, these are the type answers you're going to get. So Doooovid disagrees with basically all of them. But because of the rigorousness of scientific presentation, I'm going to teach you theories that I disagree with first, before I could correctly lay out my theory. And I'm not going to. I appreciate Chase and Simon and the chunking theory, and I see it's brilliant. But ultimately, it's a flawed theory, and it's false. But the historical development, it would be mentioned in the development of how people thought about these things, and how in 1973, two brilliant minds came up with the chunking theory, and in some sort of history of the ideas. But you need to know this stuff. You don't need to know this stuff, but I'm going to put a book out on the topic, and you need them. I'm trying to demonstrate the need of the multiple truth hypothesis, and say chunking is a brilliant idea, even though it's false. Chunking could produce large amounts of correct predictions, even though it's an incorrect model. There might be elements of the chunking model that are true enough that somehow it's still useful in making predictions. And so when you talk about the multiple truth hypothesis, okay, there's multiple models that are all flawed, but still make predictions significantly higher than 50%. And what do you do with all those models? And a truth discovery is I don't know. I just don't know. The hard problem.
I got a quote for you. The right model rests upon a skull pile of the wrong models. So in order to get to the right model, you have to maybe go through some wrong models, realize why they're wrong, because that's a stepping stone towards the right answer.
Well, and actually have equations that you could run them through and determine their predictive power, and say, okay, there's really no such thing as the right model or the wrong model. There's, so to say, predictive power, right, and you're saying the wrong model has predictive power of 0%. It is absolutely zero predictive power. It is never right. And you're saying that's the wrong model, or you're saying no, it's the wrong model if it's 49.99% correct of the time. That's still the wrong. So it's like a moral judgment. For mathematics, it makes no difference. You have predictive power that's going to range somewhere between 0 and 1. So the multiple truth hypothesis, you're going to have an infinite set of all hypotheses, and the predictive power of it could be the vast majority, like 99.999% of hypotheses in theory have absolutely zero predictive power, but they're still part of some larger set of hypotheses that could potentially have predictive power. And then you might see that no model has predictive power greater than a certain level, and that could be very small, or it could be that certain models have predictive power that are, quite high. But yeah, so that's what we do. So I think it's advancing. Hopefully,
yeah, we have someone new on the show who wanted to come on and add something to the conversation. So thank you for joining. Is Aiken okay? Is that what we should call you?
You can call me Aiken. You can call me Rumblefish. You can call me Chris. I don't care.
Awesome. Yeah, well, it's great to meet you. I think I actually saw you. I can't recall which stream it was, but I do recall this background. So it looks like you got a little man cave streaming setup there. It looks pretty cool.
I develop chips, signal processing chips, for a living.
So are you inside some sort of Faraday cage right now?
I'm in a Faraday cage
Based
in New Zealand, based at the top of the South Island in New Zealand. So you can see next to me, you can see a lot of electronic crap next to me, right? FPGA development, chip design stuff, very high frequency. serial ports and lots of RF communication and lots
Awesome.
of crap. Okay.
Will you do that for
I've been
devices,
doing-
electronic?
I do it for a number of applications I can't talk about. For a very wealthy client. Yes.
But it'd be like some sort of device that would be electrical, where they hit a button and it does exactly what they want, and you create a circuit
Look,
board.
it involves 2 levels of Faraday cages. That's all he's going to tell us.
Put it this way, there's a reason why, I can't talk about what I'm doing, but as soon as you start talking about spike neural networks and things like this, I can't talk about it even more. All I'm going to say is that chunking is really interesting, and the way that the brain may compress data. But I just wanted to just add something that's quite exciting into the discussion, okay, which you may not be aware of. And firstly, I really enjoy your guys' discussions, and I may come across as being confrontational sometimes in the actual chat, but I don't intend to be.
No, you seem cool to me. From what I remember from your comments, you have some strong opinions, but I respect that.
I'm definitely a Bohemian, right?
Oh yeah, I think
okay.
he was mostly right. Like, I haven't seen anything in what he came up with that I would identify as an incorrect assumption. So no, it's cool. I mean, we respect that. I don't know about Doovid, but I sure love having people with strong opinions around.
Yeah, especially if you have expertise on these subjects. I mean, you got a wrench. You've been. I mean, honestly, you could have been anybody. I had no idea who you were, but yeah, I mean, you've been making interesting comments for a while. Jennifer's bequeathed you a wrench, and if you got expertise on these subjects, definitely please share.
So yes, I've been doing this stuff for 30 years, right? So I use MATLAB every day as part of my profession for modeling, doing signal processing stuff, detection, a lot of stuff to do with noise and chaos theory and things like this, right?
So you put money in Stephen Wolfram's pocket.
Yeah, I put money in a lot of never mind. Okay, so neural networks, spiked neural networks. Okay, it's easy to think. One of the problems, paradigm shifts that I've had to get through recently is that even when you are considering sort of like a neural network as something that is emulating the brain, right, or emulating the neural synaptic interconnections with activation potentials and things like this. And I don't know if you're aware of or understand the concept of the spiking that goes on and what actually happens.
It'd be good for you to tell us. It would be good for you to tell us exactly what that means. So a neural net, just for the people who aren't sure how that works, how exactly does a neural net compare with generalized AI?
Okay, so I want to go back one step further to understand this, to understand that in the 70s, right, there was a guy by the name of Leon Chua, Filipino fella, who I think got the Nobel Prize for work associated with topics relating to this. But in electronics, you have traditionally inductors, capacitors, resistors. Okay, the 3 like passive elements that can be used to sort of describe any circuit. You lump together, put in some sort of network, you describe most things, but it couldn't. Okay, you can't use capacitors, inductors, and resistors and derive realistic physical values and describe a neuron.
Does the algorithm add something? Does the algorithm add something new?
What happened is Leon Chua came up.
On what level is the algorithmic implementation of these basic ingredients real?
Sorry, I'm getting to that bit. What I'm trying to say is Leon Chua discovered that there was a 4th electronic component called a memristor right? Underpinning memristor technology, which is going in a lot of the stuff today. Intel are investing billions of dollars. It's analog computing is making a comeback, right? And a lot of the really advanced neural network stuff is based upon these components called memristors. Okay, the memristor behaves like a neuron. Okay, it's not so the traditional capacitors, inductors, resistors, those sorts of things, they were insufficient until we discovered in the 70s that there was this part missing called a memristor, and they were able to practically implement them in the 90s. And what's underpinning this spiking, this neural spiking, is chaos. If you do not have a chaotic system underpinning the way neurons will spike, they just don't work. It just doesn't work. And so these neurons, every single neuron interconnecting to other neurons in your brain, it's generating these spikes, right? And the spikes, these going, they if they pass over an activation potential, right? They will generate some event, some if they receive a signal over an activation potential, that will cause them to trigger, right? And this characteristic is the characteristic that is emulated inside a neural net. So I'm sorry it was a long-winded way to get to there.
So that
right?
okay, I think I follow
Okay.
what you're saying. Just to be clear, what does the spiking part mean? So the spiking is introducing these chaotic events. Is that correct?
Okay, so underpinning, I'd have to go into the whole concept of how how this kind of component works, which is ultimately a neuron, right? And okay, so hang on, I'm trying to work this in a very simple way. Okay, ask the question again, Jen. Sorry, what was the question specifically?
I just wanted to be ultra clear on what exactly you meant by spiking, and I was asking whether
it's a voltage potential that's generated by a neuron, right, across a synaptic link to another neuron or other neurons, right, that looks like a spike. It's got a certain voltage potential, then it shoots up very suddenly, then it falls back, and it kind of has a little wee sort of like oscillatory bit at the end of it, and it's this spiking which is used to trigger other neurons to do work, to generate other spikes and do things like this, right?
Okay, so how does that then translate over to the neural? Like, because the part is not clear to me.
Can we slow this down a little bit?
Sure.
You're saying, like a regular chip, you have your like anyone learns basic electronics, you have your transistors, resistors, capacitors, but you're saying there's a fourth thing.
That's right.
To complete the circuit, the universal circuit, and I'm assuming
that's correct.
You're modeling consciousness as a process here. So the way I would word it, I would say you're one step closer. You found the circuit, but now the only thing you're missing is the information centralizer. So your model is one step closer, i.e. one step up the skull pile of wrong theories towards the right theory. And now it's more clear that we have this missing piece of the puzzle. What did you call it?
Okay, so firstly, everything that I've talked about is standard physics, it's standard electronics. However, it's called a memristor. Memristor.
Okay, I just wrote the word into the chat, and this is one of those difficult ones. I just wanted to take a second to quickly welcome the new guest.
Correct.
That I do also appreciate for joining. In the email, they said their name was Sam, but I'm not sure if you want to quickly introduce yourself now, just to be welcome to the show. Are you there? I see that you're muted. Sam. Anyway, I'll just wait and see. We'll let you keep talking, Aiken. I just want to.
Okay.
So you're talking about when I think neural net, because I used to work in voice ID. So when we talked about neural nets, that was the computer.
As you know, you are in the middle.
Actual consciousness takes place. And it has to be orchestrated in some way, which is a much more subtle problem, I'm sure, to give something which is we could call genuine, something that can really feel something in a genuine sense. But in a certain sense, it's the or choice which maybe gives us scope for free will. I've never been quite sure what I thought about free will. Certainly the view is that if you have a deterministic universe like Newtonian picture, or when you introduce Maxwell's equations, it's still deterministic. If you introduce Maxwell's demons even, it's still deterministic. If you introduce the quantum wave function, you introduce the Schrodinger equation, it's still deterministic. It's not deterministic or something when you have this reduction of the state, and maybe that's where one's consciousness actually does come in and makes a decision which goes back in time in some sense. Now, namely, this is one of the things that came about from my
look at all the statistics, and that's what I'm pointing out. And none of that makes me racist, and it certainly doesn't make me a white supremacist. I mean, I'm Jewish. I mean, what about that? Huh? I mean, can't I play the Jew card? Maybe all these people are anti-Semites, right? Maybe the reason this woman sent this letter to my company trying to get me fired is because I'm a Jew and she's anti-Semitic. Why don't I just accuse her of that? And then if she denies it, that proves that she is. Anyway, here's another one.
Another way to look at it, I think, is that the universe itself, by its very nature, functions sort of like a quantum computer, and that's just the nature of reality.
Versions of the first part of what you said. We can talk about the second part, which is, is the universe a quantum computer already? Does it just work that way? And this is very interesting because, there was a famous physicist named John Wheeler, and he said that, physics went through 3 phases in his lifetime. It started off that everything was a particle.
Welcome back, guys. Apologies.
That's okay. Can I say up front, I'm not.
It's just one of those things.
I just wanted to say up front.
It's just one of those things.
I just what I'm talking about here. None of this is crazy out there science. I'm talking about just mainstream stuff. But I'm talking about stuff that, like, unfortunately, unless you know about this, you are just not even on the page. As far as
doing what I'm trying
technology
to
is
do. I'm
concerned.
saying, that's just the rigorous method of science where you have to explain the current ideas on the marketplace that best explain the phenomenon you're talking about before you could propose your explanation to the phenomenon. You have to, the people right now who don't have a good explanation for the phenomenon have to go with the current best models. But
I'm not going to explain my theories. I don't own, so I can't actually explain. I'm under NDA. So what I am going to give you is an explanation of where the science is relating to spike neural networks, and I will provide you some links, Jen, via that email connection that I think you'll find interesting, relating to how the brain actually. They've discovered now that these spikes that are generated by the neurons will actually synchronize up. So in a region, what will happen is the periodicity of these spike trains will actually synchronize, and when they phase with each other, the actual peaks of these spikes are strong enough electromagnetic signals to actually add and modify the potentials in neurons that are not directly connected to neurons. That it's like an RF communication from one neuron, from one region to another. And I'll provide the solid backup for this. But
awesome, thanks.
So the thing is that what you've got to think.
I mean, I read the whole thing out to the adaptive resonance theory of the brain. I mean, there's different models. I read Stephen Grossberg's version of it, but yeah, I mean, there's understandings of consciousness that this phenomenon that you're talking about. I mean, me and Jennifer are more subscribing to quantum mind, but there's current models on the market that don't go to quantum phenomenon, and some of them say that this phenomenon you're talking about could lead to the larger creation of consciousness, that it's an effect larger than itself that resonates, and somehow when there's enough of these spikes, it creates enough of a resonance that somehow it results in the phenomenon of consciousness. That's one of the theories that are currently on the market now.
Well, let's say that the thing about truth is that truth is predicated on a decision, right? Okay.
The way I word this fact is that this is how I say it. I say all information positive assertions involve axioms.
Yeah. Okay. So to sort of relate that to the idea that what I'm talking about is essentially an analog characteristic prior to some sort of digital truth assertion, right? So what's happening is you've got, and this is what happens with a neural network, is you're actually getting input stimuli coming into what is effectively a big filter, a big sort of weighted average. Okay, and as each input stimuli comes in, okay, they integrate up.
It's more of a compressor than a filter. It's more of a compressor. It's more of a compressor than a filter.
Yes,
but
you're right.
A compressor and a filter are the same thing based on what's called the measurement limit. One of the aspects of the measurement limit, which is also listed in the Copenhagen interpretation, is that waveform reduction is equivalent to measurement. So they're the same thing. So you have this equivalence that you can draw between certain systems that you can't draw in the physical systems themselves, i.e. filter and compressor being equivalent, physiologically equivalent.
So, and I'm not disagreeing. What I'm finding fascinating, and I'll send you some links to some really, really cool research being done relating to neuromorphic computing, right? And in particular, the use of what were they called? Hang on, I've just got to look it up to get the right word. That's it. Nano oscillators. Using little nano oscillators. They're actually trying to use oscillators to model neurons based upon these memristors, and there's some amazing advances, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to actually emulate not just this physical interconnect in these arrays, but in these neural networks, but they're also trying to kind of like emulate this RF connection, which is sort of like which is a non-wired, it's almost a wireless connection, like a very broadband connection that seems to exist between neurons. And this is phenomenal.
That comes back to the problem of consciousness, in that where is your information? Like that's why I would call it a consciousness and information multiplexer, because one of the functions of consciousness is to centralize these operations, i.e. information computing is all happening in one place. and it's a
Yeah.
distributed computation across the lattice of the photonic matrix. So your consciousness is made up of photons, and within that photonic matrix, that the photonic matrix itself is the information compression. They're equivalent, and that's the thing that's receiving the signal. That's
Yeah,
the
we have more
information
bias.
centralizer.
We have more bias to focus on the quantum level, although
I
there are
I
phenomena.
understand that.
What he's saying matches up with the quantum thing, because he's saying, oh, turns out they have to model it with oscillators. Well, of course they have to, because there's a finite number of quantum states associated with every mind body, and you have to be able to oscillate either in the environment of those states or between those states. And so anything that doesn't incorporate oscillation won't accept the underlying quantum reality, which is that there's a patchwork of possible quantum states, which are maybe separated, but they're adjacent energetically. Energetic separation
So
and federation are different.
So I'd also like to, this might help some people kind of understand a little bit more about something. There's a very new agey sort of like idea out there of frequency and the importance of frequency, right? And you see frequency, and frequency is important. I'm not saying it isn't, but I want to point out there's a very big difference between frequency, right, and periodicity.
How many
right?
dimensions is frequency?
Exactly.
You like it?
Yeah.
I like it too. No, I totally get it. I love this shit.
I am, in the work I am doing, more interested in waveform shape. Okay.
Well, of course you are. That's the magic key.
Yeah. Well, I can't talk about any more than that, right? But waveform shape, and the periodicity of waveform shapes, is really interesting to me. And what is really interesting to me is underpinning the concept of the way that this memristor component works is, you've got the only way that you can really understand it is by looking at chaos theory and chaotic systems. And
so for people who don't know, a chaotic system has a rather peculiar definition. I don't know if you have it memorized, but I believe a chaotic system physically is defined as a system which, as time progresses, depends increasingly more on the initial conditions.
Yes, it will. Yes, but you also get these strange effects that come about due to the presence of attractors, right? So
Ordo ab chaos.
Order out of chaos, yes, which is actually the way neurons work. And if I could direct you to Leon Chewer's work, right, looking at when you were drawing spirals for galaxy formation, you're saying this is how exclusion works and things like this. A lot of that work, I look at it and I go, oh wow, this is stuff that is actually underpinning a lot of the work that is going into cellular neural networks. And when I say that this is important, it is not going to be too long now where you're going to have a graphics card in your machine that will actually be using neuromorphic chips rather than graphics chips. This is huge stuff that's been invested. Intel and other companies like HP are investing billions and billions of dollars in this. And what you say, Doovid, it's money counts, right? Okay. So they're putting the money in. Right now, if I decide to, I can actually buy development kits for developing this stuff. And why? Because it's about 1,000 times more power efficient to do many sort of computations in the analog domain rather than in the digital domain.
Sounds like sounds like these scientists have stumbled on to an important attribute of living matter, which is its efficiency.
There's an interview which I'll send you the link to that I've sent to a number of people where they're interviewing us. It's a YouTube video that I think you'll go nuts over, where they're interviewing this lady researcher at Stanford, I think it is, University, in neuromorphic chips, and the technique they're using to grow and train neuromorphic chips is, instead of using a lithography process to print the chips, like you've got your silicon and different doped layers and different layers of material, and they basically use a screen printing process, a photolithography process to print different layers, right? That's how you might have 20 plus layers easily.
Yeah, I definitely know exactly
right.
what you're talking about, and I'm not sure if the audience does, so I'm just going to pull up some images, because when I think of a lithograph, what I think of is MC Escher. I don't know if anybody else is familiar with him, but he did his, I believe his works were reproduced via lithograph. I'm not even sure how to pronounce that word, but I just thought I'd pull up some images.
Neither do I. And
that's the trouble with being so big brained that you know all these words that you've never heard. So the first time you go to say them out loud, you're like,
I'll send you some links, but there's some stuff that I think you'll when you get, you'll go, oh my God, because there's a particular during this interview, they actually they said they've developed this new way of creating these neural networks using neuromorphic technology, using this memristor technology. And what they do is, instead of lithography of complex circuits, they just basically put little pads on the silicon where they can actually inject a current into an array of pads. And then what they do is they stick these chips in a salt solution, and they change the different salt concentrations and everything like this while they apply a current to the different pads, and they grow memristor structures on the silicon while they are training it using artificial intelligence training algorithms. And what they do is, where they get failure in where the salt crystals actually join, they get the equivalent of a synaptic connection. They get memory, they get amplification, and they get interconnection. And what they do is they use the same techniques that you see in error correction, like you have in CDs or DVD players, right?
Yeah, they're allowing
to basically get rid of the redundant. It's super redundant. They get rid of the erroneous connections. Right?
Yeah, they're allowing the material to dictate the energetic flow, thereby guaranteeing themselves the path of least resistance, i.e., that which requires least computing power, in order to achieve whatever computational load this entity is taking in. Very interesting.
They can do very complex image recognition systems that will do a very good job with using this sort of like salt crystal growing technique on these chips. And I'll send you the links, and you'll be able to check it out and see that it's real, not bullshit, right? Actually,
I believe you. I'm trained to recognize based on tone of voice whether somebody is giving accurate testimony, and so far you're batting 1,000. So
this stuff, this sort of technology is okay. So you've got Alvin Toffler's curve, right? Okay, and everybody, I just think that everything is accelerating so fast right now that even people like me, who are 30 years in the profession and maybe not at the bleeding edge, but pretty, reasonably close to the.
Well, you're on my stream right now.
That I'm finding that if I don't try really hard, I'm going to fall off that edge. I'm going to fall off that slope, right?
Yeah, I can totally relate to that.
And you can't. I see everybody out there now talking about different technical subjects that they don't They haven't got the capability of understanding, because everything is going so fast and changing so quickly.
Well, think about a quantum state transition. Think about how that works physiologically, because you have the quantum field, which is photonic, and you have the non-photonic field, which is still a field, still a space-time event, but it has mass. And there's a quantum state transition that is happening right now on the level of consciousness. And you should look up the 100th monkey effect, because that happens in humans too. And it's like, of course it feels like it's going fast, because a bunch of people are being assimilated to the higher state vibrational frequency of thinking, where they actually can discuss these things meaningfully. And so it's like you get to see firsthand that things don't happen in a linear fashion. They happen in a quantum fashion, i.e. there's a few what you call early adopters who understand it and are like at the cutting edge. And then everybody else is assimilated to the new quantum state, which is this new level of interaction where you care about different things, like i.e. what you're describing, everyone caring about these technical subjects that you're just like thinking like, how the hell do you even understand? Like, how are you even discussing this subject? Like, you seem like a pleb to me, but yet you're talking to me about this ultra deep thing. It creates dissonance, doesn't it? It's like, holy shit, I live in a fishbowl.
To me, it's the only reason why I know about this stuff is because it's my bread and butter, right? Like it's, I couldn't imagine.
Well, maybe that's not the only reason. Maybe there's some karmatic reason of you as a person, of having done good works and acquired particular knowledge that allowed you better access to the early transition.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't really start with a bio anyways, but if you had your education and training and you're working in that field versus a person saying, I did not have my education.
Well, he could tell you, Doovid, but he'd have to kill you.
I mean,
I was just kidding.
Yeah.
But you're saying I did not have my education and training in that field. I just have a strong interest in consciousness and education in general. And say, okay, there's research and patents and making a device and economics and selling. And then, there's the objective truth of the matter, or just the pure joy of figuring things out. And so one thing I talk about pretty regularly, always, and even last week, about machine interfaced interaction, where especially COVID-19, where you're ordering from Amazon, but the direction is saying humanity doesn't really know how to deal with this, but we, through the computer interfaced interaction, like, we're in different continents, different countries, talking to each other. If we're all trustworthy engineers and scientists, Aiken, Jennifer, and Doovid could make a device that works, because you're saying we're all competent in our field, and if we did something and we made a device and we sold it to someone through capitalism or whatever karma, you could trust that the device would work and you could get it at a market price, versus some level of can we really figure out some phenomenon that historically was not capable of being understood, with the series of answers and new understandings that are available, through technology, through sources. And then we didn't even like grill you or interview, because like if you watch our show, presumably you have spiritual leanings and saying, yes, I think the phenomenon you're talking about are interesting.
Sure. I'm not so sure. The people.
If he wants to answer, we can. But saying like the phenomenon you're talking about.
I just want to hop in describing Aiken before I give Aiken a chance to describe Aiken.
Finish my comment on his point of saying that the phenomenon you're describing are true and interesting and important, but from my perspective, they're just material phenomenon, and they will not explain consciousness, which is not a material phenomenon.
Yeah, so sorry to interrupt you there. I just wanted to say real quick, like, he doesn't give me the vibe of a person who's driven by what he would describe as a spiritual impulse, but rather curious person who wants answers and enjoys, as you described, Doovid, the feeling of figuring things out without knowing that this whole time he was building towards an integral understanding of consciousness. It just so happens that consciousness matches all the things that he has enjoyed discovering, like underlying order and theories and the cool feeling of getting that rush of, oh, I get it.
I mean, it's aching like a JF nihilist, and you're saying like it was just.
I don't know that I would peg him as a pure nihilist. He more seems like the type of person who would just placidly go through life accepting whatever ritual was thrown at him and lose himself occasionally in the bliss of contemplation, pure forms, which enables one to solve these engineering type problems. But please, Aiken, feel free to
Okay, so I'll yeah, it was rude of me to come on without giving some sort of brief.
No, it's good. I immediately went into the traditional knowledge uncovering process. So it was even better.
Like a page of Talmud. Like it was like studying a page of Talmud. You just jumped right in. You couldn't.
Yeah, but it would be like meeting a rabbi and just being like, "Hey, how's it going?" And all of a sudden, he's halfway down the page going over some incredibly fine point.
Yes, and when the page is already open, you don't waste your time saying hello and making introductions. You jump right in. But like at a certain point, it's like, who the hell are you?
Let me give you the 5-minute who I am, right? If that's okay, if you would like that.
Oh yeah, we would love it. Go ahead.
Okay, so New Zealander, 52 years old, 3 children, 3 grandchildren. Okay.
Congratulations.
I have a science degree. I have.
Usually what I like to ask people is how far back can you remember, and what was the series of decisions that led you to the place where you're at today?
I'm not going to cover past lives, Jen, for you.
No, I just meant like when you were a kid, were you interested in technology or whatever?
Yeah, I was interested in technology. I went to, when I went to university, I happened to board with a hellfire Georgia cracker preacher and his wife, and became a Christian, and I was a born-again Christian for 18 years before I discovered Satan. I'm joking about the Satan, but I also, during my time in Christianity, much to the chagrin of the people who in the church that I was in, my next door neighbor was a Freemason, and so I joined Freemasonry. So I got lots of people praying for me, praying for my eternal soul. When I was a Christian in a very Wesleyan Methodist fundamentalist church, I decided, well, I'll do that because I wanted to see, because I trusted my own conscience, and became a Freemason, and was a Freemason for, I've never really added up the exact number of years, but for a dozen, 12 or 14 years or something maybe. And so I went through Blue Lodge and Freemasonry, then I went through Red Lodge. So I got up in York Rite up to the 7th degree in York Rite, which I would imagine is about equivalent, even though it's a very different thing, to times it by 3 to get what it's equivalent to in the Scottish Rite in the States, so say 21, right? Then got bored and decided I didn't believe in God. Okay, that's where it really stopped. So that was both the church I went to that I'd already left because pricks, and the when I actually indicated that I did no longer believe in supreme being, the lodge was considerable consternation. Because, of course, that is a prerequisite for being a Mason. So they had special meetings and decided that because I considered myself, because I was my own God, then I did actually believe in a God. So they would let me continue being a member, but I didn't feel that. I stayed on for a couple of years, but I didn't feel comfortable with that idea because I don't consider myself a God. I just don't believe in anything. So I left. I decided to stand down, so I left in good standing, and I've been engaged in a lot of stuff to do with high tech, lots and lots of products, like you were saying, Doooovid, products, international products in many cases, involving interdisciplinary teams across country boundaries. You know, it's very, you know, not untypical these days to be working with people in India and Texas and wherever, you know, all over the place. And I set up my own company, and I'm working for select clients now, and very happy. And I'm able to, let's say, I can't really talk about what I'm doing, except to say that.
Did you listen
I'm
to
now
when we talked about? I mean, just because we talk about it quite a bit.
What I do.
About like a high IQ person doing technology sales is a good way to make money, where you understand components that are beyond the capacity of most people, and then get a better commission. I'm saying, like, it's something I've talked about it quite a few times. I don't know.
Yeah,
do you remember?
An example of that, of your thesis there? He's an anecdotal example of the process you described. So good for you, man. Good.
So that's me anyway. So
You successfully reproduced. Is that your own children in the background? There were people walking in the background.
Probably. I didn't see them. One of my sons. My son is employed by me. He's, because of COVID, he was working in a 1.5 hat winery restaurant as a chef in Melbourne, and he had to leave because of COVID. He came back to New Zealand, and of course, because it's destroyed the tourist industry, I've taken him on as a trainee, as basically a trainee CAD/engineer person, and we're teaching him for the next few years how to do this stuff. So he was in and out.
Yeah, good for you. Do you know Jennifer in real life? Are you a Week in Review? Like, how do you come to Week in Review?
Some friends that I have. This came up in conversations, so I just check it out, and I'm working quite a lot, so
did somebody say something?
Listen to stuff in the background.
Did somebody say something horrible about me?
No.
Okay, because sometimes people meet me because somebody else said something horrible about me. So
I'm
glad.
Are there affiliated streams?
It wouldn't make much difference to me anyway.
Are there affiliated streams that you listen to that are similar to this, or this just word of mouth?
No,
someone said they're listening to this.
I'm everywhere.
I mean, you listen to like Lex Friedman and Joe Rogan or Stephen Wolfram, or are you Public Space, or are you? I mean, you're into Freemasonry.
A number of those above, but also I probably started. I probably started engaging in streams by. I like to argue with people, so I would get on Lift the Veil, Nathan Stolf and Lift the Veil for years, and just argue the shit as much as I could with people in the chat.
About given topics, like anything, like you'll argue about anything.
Well,
I mean,
yeah, why not?
Are you trying to sign up for? I mean, like if you listen to this, you know we've been trying to create debates. So, like you're saying, you're here and you want to join the debates.
Oh, I didn't. I'm pretty busy, so I'm more of a listener. But yeah, I'm happy to help out.
Oh yeah, I think you coming on and talking about your domain-specific knowledge is extremely valuable for not just us, but maybe the entire industry of this upcoming technological revolution, because they're going to have to contend with the quantum nature of the mind. They're going to have to run up against these axioms at some point.
Yeah, I don't know. Usually people like me get brought by somebody, and then that technology unfortunately ends up by not being very public. So we'll see. It all depends upon the.
I totally get it, because the algorithmic implementation is proprietary, so you don't know where to draw the line, and so you just err on the side of caution. But in the interest of the public, I think it's much better if
You're saying you're not really an entrepreneur. You're just like a technician who's working for somebody else, or you're also an entrepreneurial.
Entrepreneurial from the perspective of I have my own company and work for a number of different people, but I tend to and developing my own products, right? But
Your bread and
so,
butter.
you know, there's sometimes, you know, there's $250,000 worth of hardware right next to me. I can't really afford that, right? So working for other people, you get access to resources that you maybe wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Okay.
I mean, I'm from Detroit, and I don't know if you follow my channel, but I go to, before COVID-19, you know, all sorts of conventions, and we have, you know, because automobiles here in Detroit, there are people at vendors that make microchips, you know, especially for automotive devices. Like if you're going to put some sort of configuration in your dashboard, and you're going to need a circuit board to connect into the automobile, or even just any device where, you know, it said like you want to hit a button and get that to do something mechanical, you might need a circuit board. Or I mean, if you're into industry, you're talking like the Siemens. Oh man, I'm so out of it. I forget even the abbreviation. But you're saying like that's what you do. Like people have devices, and
if somebody, for example, wanted to control a laser to burn out the bad parts of a silicon die, and they wanted to do that really, really fast, and understand the control loops and control theory, and practically implement that blindingly fast on a device, that would probably, I would be the kind of person to come to. If you wanted to detect, if you wanted to do, I've done. I was a senior manager for a routing company, doing edge routing for a few years of my career, doing packet classification. So I guess if you want to be able to inspect somebody's packets in real time on a gigabit point of presence and be able to tell what they're talking about, I'd probably be the guy that you would talk to, right?
you have your own
If you want to
patent
understand, when POTUS travels to this neck of the woods and he's got a security contingent, there has been times in the past where the security around POTUS, for example, has had on their belts mobile radios that I have architected. So, or architected part of, to be more specific. So if that's I'm the kind of guy who does that kind of thing, right?
Awesome. You have any of your own patents?
Yes, I have a few patents. I don't want to go into that though.
Good enough. I mean, good for you, and we appreciate that you watch our show and that you came on. You know, I assume you're basically welcome anytime.
I just wanted to point out that there's a grey, that the whole concept of chunking. I want to just get back to that, because this is really interesting. The concept of compressing information without suffering from without suffering from artifacts that come along when you try to compress information. You start playing with bandwidth. You start.
When I said chunking, I was talking about the Chase and Simon 73. I mean, was study on chess players, but also speed reading and psychology.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
It's not the neuroscience, and so there is no compression. Like the theory of a chunk in the neuroscience, from what I understand, is that, I mean, some models might have a compression process, but from the chunking I was describing, I don't think that a chunk goes through a compression process.
Well, the loss of
I think in computer science, it probably would in the brain, and that's the problem with taking a model for how a computer goes about something and then trying to model that to a neural circuit, because like compression may or may not be something that is possible in the brain.
Well, can
Well, it is possible. It's just a multi-step process, and we're trying to drill down on where exactly this chunking is happening physiologically / technically. And it's important because I think what Aiken is seeing is chunking as a step within the compression process. Is that correct?
okay,
Well, I mean, I just
this will blow you away. This will blow you away.
Talking about the computer chunking as opposed to human chunking.
Okay, so I want to this element, this thing that I'm going to talk about. I have to provide a little bit of basis, a 30-second basis to get to where I need to go. So I'm sorry if it sounds long-winded. Okay.
No, it's all good, man. We're
okay. So I've developed products that have won awards at like NAB, National Audio Broadcasting Show, right, in the US in the past, related to doing well, I've been a part of a team that's done that sort of thing, and one of the things that I designed, was actually I took an algorithm that was actually that was being used for doing do you guys know anything about image sensors at all? Image sensors, like your sensor in your camera.
Sure, yeah.
So you know that the image sensor is in actual fact it's just an array of pixels that has actually effectively got a red, green, blue filter over the top.
I'm from Detroit. I've seen the latest of the driverless car technologies demonstrated, and I guess like the digital sensors or measures that they use for precision, like the blue light and white light, or
yes. This thing is not real. This is not really so much related to that as when you actually get the information from the image sensor, right? The pixel array is broken down into red, green, and blue, and there are double the number of green pixels as there are reds and blues, right? Because of the way the brain works. Okay, it's so when you're actually looking at a screen or looking at something, the actual image sensor that's captured that data, it's captured twice as many greens as it has captured blues or as it has captured reds. Okay, and so if you in a lot of cases you'll find that the reds and the blues and the greens after that gets from the image sensor, you've got to fill in the missing reds, greens, and blues, right? So you use very, very weird. You can use very, very weird algorithms to do that. And what really blew my mind and just created a paradigm shift for me is when I was developing. I reversed engineered. Anyway, what can I say? I took an algorithm that was out there already and converted it from software to hardware, which was very hard because it needed to go very fast. But the thing is that this algorithm, when it reconstructed the reds and the blues or the greens, it actually used reds and blues to construct some of the energy in the reds and the blues to construct green pixels. Okay. And when I ran this algorithm through the camera and on the monitor, I could actually switch off in real time this algorithm that used fake information like power derived from the red or blue spectrum of adjacent pixels to recreate the green pixels that were missing, for example, right? And vice versa. When I looked at that on the monitor, I could actually literally switch that algorithm on and off. And you could switch it when you switched it off, and you say, and I had my boss put his arm up to the screen like this, right? I'm holding my arm up to the screen, and it looked like a perfectly nice, clean, crystal clean image, very good quality cameras. And then I turned the algorithm on, and all the hairs. What I didn't see is the detail just banged out of this image. Out of this image, you could see the individual hairs on the guy's arm, right? Whereas before I thought I was seeing reality, okay? And then when we turned the algorithm on, which used totally physically wrong data, it was using reds and blues.
Well, it was wrong according to your inference about how it worked. It was right according to reality.
Well, yes. So I can't see. Now maybe there's some weirdness in the eye, right? But then again, this is passing through the eye, so I'm actually running the algorithm twice. This is really truly bizarre. That you can use reds and blues to the energy of reds and blues to construct greens. And now think about what I'm saying. I'm saying when my boss held his arm up to the screen, to the camera, and it was a really good quality picture, I went, oh yeah, that's working. And then I hit the algorithm, and the hairs, you could see that, whereas you couldn't before, now you could see the hairs coming out in precision because of this thing. And to me, it shouldn't happen. I still can't get my mind around how you can actually distort and warp information and create more something that seems to be more precise, right? And maybe it's got something to do with the fact that I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of toll quality audio, but if you look at most audio on a phone line is restricted to about 3 kilohertz, so 300 hertz to 3 kilohertz, and it's so this toll quality audio sort of, but inside that, because your human ear uses hairs to determine, to pick up the sensitivity of the different frequencies, and the little hairs are moving backwards and forwards with the compression of the ear. Then what happens is you get an effect called masking, where the harmonics mask. So in actual fact, you can use this effect, this effect of information being hidden by the ear to actually get further compression, right? And yet also you've got a roll off. So they do a thing called sophometric weighting, where you actually you change the frequency characteristics going into the ear to give you better response. This blows me away. This concept blows me away. It's
because you have no analog for it, because it's functioning essentially the opposite way as a compressor.
That's right.
A decompressor is not enough to encompass what this is doing. It's an inverse transform function, i.e. repopulating the states which were lost upon the primary waveform reduction, i.e. the intake via the sense organs.
Yes, exactly. And I believe, and the information seems crisper and clearer, and I believe it more because it's there.
Think about it like this, okay?
Right?
Think about it like this. What are the colors?
What are the colors?
Yeah, what are the colors? It's some teeny tiny chunk of the electromagnetic spectrum.
Yeah, true. Yes.
And what do we know about the electromagnetic spectrum? It's immanent, transcendent, everywhere. So we have this subjective bias that there's a difference between the colors, but the level upon which the distinction is real is us. And actually, the colors aren't really so different. They just represent this larger, what you call an energetic potential, which is, for entropic reasons, going to have these symmetries. Which is why it's counterintuitive, because in our head we're thinking, well, I just have to do this like addition of lights and I'm going to suddenly get white light. But the universe doesn't see it that way. The universe is just one thing, and the oneness of it all, of the electromagnetic spectrum, is simply too much for most people to accept into their way of thinking. It's just like, it's just another infinity, right? But because you have all this good karma from calculus and all the other stuff that you've done, one more infinity is not going to cause your entire subjective apparatus to implode, right? So someone in the chat is just like, oh, where does this guy come from? He just popped out fully formed. It's just like, well, that's what the theory predicts. It's a quantum state transition. Like, there is no intermediary state. There's a long period of contemplation. where you don't really have a huge insight, but you're still sort of toiling away at it. And then there's a phase transition where you get the insight, which hopefully leads to a full transition where you actually really understand the thing rather than just remaining at this subluminal level of Superlubrix where you think you understand something, but you don't. And you can see the difference between him and this guy, where this guy's like, oh, wow, he knows so much. It's actually mind blowing, but he's still got this humility, right? That's
I don't know very much, but I know that guy, Superlubrix or whatever his name is, needs to go and do some basic study. But that's just my opinion. If you're going to do a human resources product, you need to know a bit about human resources. You need to know a little bit about the market that you're actually trying to get into, right? And he doesn't, so it doesn't make it. So it's all a LARP, right? Because unless you want to get somebody else to do all your work.
That's why he wants to use someone else's money.
It's always the case.
Yeah.
I get people coming to me all the time with good ideas that want me to do all the work, right? It's crazy.
Yeah, that's my theory on it. You can't
just convert to Judaism, man. You do all the work, I make all the money. I'm sorry. That's just the way it
Are
is.
you saying he's a spiritual Jew, Doovid?
Well, no, I'm saying like at the end of the day, like you do all the work, I make all the money. There's nothing you can do about it.
Hey, as long as I get beer and cookies, I'm fine.
So you figured a way around it. Now they're doing all the work and you're making all the money.
Oh, there you go. Beer and cookies is my currency. Anyway, I don't even know why I went there. It was related to the question, and
It's just really fascinating. And I know what you mean, because when he invokes things like chunking, it's like, what do you mean chunking? But there is something to it. It's just not clear. Like once we understand the level on which it's
the only one in
happening,
the world who read Chase and Simon's 1973 paper.
Oh, that doesn't matter. It's the concept of itself of chunking is at what level biologically, electrochemically, however you want to word it, is the chunking actually happening? Because that's what's going to answer your hard question of consciousness. Because the chunking, the fact that the chunking and the chunker are structurally different entities is a transcendent truth that can yield a lot of information.
So in order to chunk, you need a chunking algorithm.
You need a chunker, like what you were describing with your like quasi-biological growth model, where you're essentially synthesizing the UBM into the structure a la microcomputing, therefore optimizing your signal to noise ratio, I guess.
Most consciousness educational theories assume that there's some natural pattern recognizing mechanism where the brain, through sense input, naturally tries to make patterns, and that over time those patterns are chunked together, where the recognition of one signal chunks together the recognitions of multiple signals, through neural networks. But saying the motivation doesn't need to be egoistic. There's just some natural process that the brain recognizes patterns when we have similar sense input.
Sorry, you guys. Can I just respond to something that was in the chat? King Kush in chat.
Okay, you're going to be your own streamer pretty soon. Pretty soon, people are going to be tuning into filters.
Talking about filters and cooling for astrophotography and things like this. Like one of the techniques that's practiced in a lot of precision sort of sensing involves one of the issues you get is you actually don't just get white noise when you're actually looking at, you don't necessarily just get normal noise sort of characteristics. Think of it like hissing, right? When you trying to put it in language, when you're looking at like sensors and you're trying to get like right down into like a very high dynamic range, right down into the noise, right? Let's say a lot of that noise is shaped, and so in actual fact, you find that one of the things that is done is they add noise. you can actually, there's special techniques called dithering and things like this, that you add noise to some systems to make them more precise. I won't go into the detail, but
it's very hard to understand this concept that the ether has a shape, and that the shape of the ether tells us information about
and it's
the
non-linear.
observables.
It's
No, I mean,
non-linear.
that
spherical.
It's parametric.
That's
that
spherical.
concept makes basic sense, because the wave pattern, in order to cancel something out, sometimes the simplest method to cancel it is to add to it. So I mean the method that compression or addition to waveforms, that canceling through addition, you should intrinsically make sense, right?
Yes. When you think about it, way back in the old days of astronomy, when they used the really big mirrors and everything like this, and then the mirrors started developing. You get the warping due to temperature or whatever like this. Even not just how perfect you get the surface, but they change and warp and create all sorts of vibratory problems and little resonances that get set up in them. So they went to the concept of lots of little mirrors with control, so they're very, very light, right? And in the process of doing that, all of a sudden the system becomes quite nonlinear. You get when you start looking at things in a lot of detail, some of these optic systems have weird sort of oscillatory or sort of nonlinear characteristics, however, if you add energy if you add energy to that system, sometimes what it can do is actually the energy that you're adding, the dither, will actually spread and dampen those nonlinear characteristics. So you actually get
like this. You're trying to tell something about a system which also holds information within the surrounding geometry. So by increasing the noise, which is informed by the geometry, it's easier to figure out, lock in on what the profile of the geometry is, and subtract that, because all you're really interested in are the eigenstates. You don't care so much about the surrounding geometry, which is why these planar mirrors didn't work, because they're essentially trying to focus a spherical waveform on a planar surface, and as we know, there is no such isomorphism.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just saying that there's some really cool things. When you're dealing with ultra precise, really high dynamic range systems, things like this, things at the surface level can seem quite counterintuitive. But it's not just that.
There's an actual reason for that in signal processing as a metaphor for consciousness. Like, do you know what a cosine transform is? The DC.
Yeah. I've done.
So the way I explain that is
digital radio. I know that.
Yeah, I know you do. I don't even know why I said it. It's just a force of habit. So you know how it always changes the profile, but it preserves the information content.
Yes.
So we have to understand our own consciousness as being at the tail end of a process of many, many, many things which can be modeled as DCTs. And so think about what you're starting with. How much is it going to look like what you're ending up with? Well, not at all, because how many transforms has it undergone? And they're not even isomorphisms because of entropy. So that's where you're starting when you're talking about finding answers to consciousness via your own subjective consciousness. Is you have to understand it as being at the tail end of a sensory series of DCT-esque things.
Yes. What's it's probably a bit much to get into orthogonality here, but
well, that's what rounds it all off together is the measurement limit.
Too much to get into orthogonality on weekly review.
So
who do you think you're talking to?
When I get
into orthogonality.
So I wanted to. The reason why I brought that up, and I went into this long-winded thing about how I was blown away by this magic in italics sort of effect that I saw doing image processing, advanced image processing, that I still can't wrap my head around. I wonder if when we talk about consciousness, if we're almost by looking at the information, we're missing the algorithm.
They're occurring on orthogonal phase spaces, yes, because
Yeah.
you have your photonic range and you have your biological range, and they're not orthogonal. What I call them is approximately orthogonal, but we can refer to stuff that's approximately orthogonal as orthogonal. It's just that the universe is unitary, so orthogonality is precluded by our universe, but we have de facto orthogonality. Not to be stick in the mud. It's just that to be precise, you sometimes have to be a touch long-winded, but I think you're kind of seeing it. Like, you're seeing that there's this thing just beyond the horizon where it unifies everything and that everything is just building up to it. Again, the skull pile metaphor is...
Have you ever seen the there's a fascinating YouTube video. I think it's called this guy's gone to a bit of work that it's quite beautiful. It's called I can never remember if it's Carl Pribram or Pibram. Let's call it the Pribram Bohm.
Oh, Pribram, yeah, the theories on consciousness. I've read some of his papers. I'm familiar with him.
I've just typed. There's actually.
He's part of Hameroff circles.
Well, yeah, I really want to. I think you'd really get a kick out of. There's a short video showing this theory. Hang on, I'm just looking it up so I can get the exact the Pribram-Bohm hypothesis, the geometry of consciousness. I thought it was actually quite beautiful. With your permission, I'll put the link in the.
Sure, yeah, that sounds great. It's definitely something that I'd be willing to take a look at, because we have this universal geometry, which is the measurement limit, which is more abstract, 3 + 1 per order in a 14-dimensional universe, and then transforming that fact into the frequency domain, where you can actually access the frequencies via the electromagnetic spectrum.
Well, this posits. I'm not saying I hold to it, but I find it fascinating. This posits that the link between the implicate and the explicit order in Bohmian theory is actually a Fourier transform, and it's quite cool. When you see, if you watch that video, it's worth watching. I'm looking at them going, oh, something feels right about this.
Well, hardly a review goes by without praise of the Fourier transform.
Yeah, but just be careful of it, because as soon as you start analyzing stuff in the real, in the FFT domain, you are starting to lose the concept of waveform shape.
Yeah, you're
Because
losing a critical dimension, which
you're averaging
geometry of the waveform itself, right? This
That's
is what you ultimately have to contend with, is that every measurement affects the geometry of the object you're originally trying to diagnose.
That's right. I suggest you have a look at that a geometry of consciousness. I think it might give you. He refers to it as hollow flux theory, right? So hollow flux theory.
I mean, that sounds right to me. It's just,
I'm not an expert in this, but I've covered this before. Like, we've talked about some of this before, and I put that book, like that free 500-page book on Bohm's ideas, that I think has a chapter on the Bohm-Pribram hypothesis. Like, we did cover this before, but no, I'm not an expert on it.
Oh no, the guy's done visually. He's done a very good job, of making you think. It's quite a compelling idea. But I actually I have to finish my day. I probably shouldn't have actually been on so long because I'm working.
Well, thank you very much for coming on, and I hope that this was helpful for your mental clarity so that you can do a better job at your work. And thank you so much for sharing your insight.
Oh, before I go, I just blow you away with. Have you ever heard of AWS? AWS instances? You probably haven't. Amazon, like many companies, have like web services, AWS, Amazon web services, right?
Yeah.
And no,
Yeah,
this isn't an ad.
The cloud computing.
And you're also familiar with sort of like the fact that there's a lot of DNA, so genomic analysis going on in the world, obviously today, right? Okay. Well, what happened is about 3 or 4 years ago, Amazon decided to put these special units on their system called it's like a configurable hardware called an FPGA. This is we're trying to do it as simple as I can. It's like a programmable array where you write hardware like it's software. Okay, and so they put these things, they're called AWS F1 instances on the web. Now these are this is supercomputing services, okay, that anybody can get access to. You can actually, if you know what you're doing with this stuff, you can code and utilize these amazing machines called F1 AWS F1 instances, right? Now, to put it into perspective, there was a company, I think it's called Dragon or Dagon. Right now, they use.
I'm familiar with them. They're here in Detroit also.
To do genomic, what do they call it? I'm not an expert in this, but I think it's called C30 or 30x analysis, genomic analysis of samples, and they can actually do a full genomic analysis to clinical levels in about 17 minutes, and it only costs about $2 or $3. And that's actually what's happening today. That's the level of crazy that's going on with technology. That's an online cloud service.
Thank you so much for sharing. It's awesome, and we hope you come back to the show and we can discuss this further, because yeah, I would appreciate those links, and I'll definitely have a look, because I think Bohm was right about a lot of things. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
That was all I had. I'm just saying that when you're talking about doing things like developing some sort of model or some sort of simulation to work out concepts, rather difficult concepts related to truth, the actual technology is actually it's not $100 million in 20 years away. The technology is actually being put in the data centers today for anyone to get access to if they apply themselves. AWS F1 instances, look up genome. Just look up something like genome, and you'll find references that will back up exactly what I'm saying.
Great. Well, look forward to that, and also hopefully discussing it on a future stream. Thank you so much for joining, and
see you later, guys.
Bye. Talk to you later. I guess we can round out the show. Doovid, I thought that was super interesting. What did you think? It's a bit of a change of pace to have somebody who was actually prepared, right? So those of you thinking that I was bullshitting, yeah, you cannot bullshit this stuff, because it is closer to a language than a rhetorical system. You can't really bullshit in a language forever, can you? Go ahead, Doovid.
Yeah, I'm glad Aiken came on, and it's good to have someone knowledgeable of science. Like, maybe he'll be more into streaming. I guess he said he's in New Zealand, so like here it's 11 o'clock, but I guess there, it's he's getting his work go. So I'd say money makes you a better person, but money is a good, maybe the best indication of force, material, karma, what's happening in the material realm, as a descriptive effect of what influence do man have on the planet. And you need a single heuristic that money is a good one. So this man is involved in commerce and activity and has ideas in science and practicality, engineering to devices, yeah, I mean, that's prime target audience, and he has insight into issues of consciousness, areas of expertise to bring forth to help both mine and Jennifer's ideas. So, I guess, Jennifer had already given him a wrench, and we're glad he found his way to the show. Hopefully he'll come on before again and again. Whether he wants to get more into like the streaming dynamics and different things about how to be a better streamer, or those things, that's up to him. And he might even try making his own videos. Why not? Maybe his sons will help him. But awesome, appreciate him coming on. Gandalf, good to be back. Also, that's Week in Review. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you find your voice. Gandalf has a voice. He needs a narrative arc so that it makes sense to people that they're getting this information from him. And largely that's what me and Jennifer are here to help people out with, and Aiken also. Besides just advancing ideas and talking about science and math, which we love doing, and probably worth keeping Week in Review running just for that alone. However, we would like to be developing characters and advancing them in streaming. So hopefully we'll find volunteers that are interested, and it's a rigorous process. As I said, it's usually the pain of the crowds. Like at the end of the day, Doovid's just going to release you in front of the crowd and wish you luck. And if you do good, awesome. We'll release you in front of the crowd again. And if you do bad, I might help clean up the damage, but
God forbid.
Yeah, but I mean, that's unfortunately the reality. There's not really anything else. You can't make the crowd like you. You could put them. You could develop a crowd and put someone in front of them and say good things, but you can't. At the end of the day, you can't make a crowd like a person. But there's a science to it, and we go over that also. So hopefully, be nice to noobs. There's no reason not to be nice to noobs, and hopefully, maybe COVID-19 things are flaring up. I'm not really on the battlefield that much these days. Even the censorship on YouTube, all of my foes are not on YouTube anymore. Whoever, God forbid, I don't know if maybe it was even his son trolling him or something. Who knows? Yeah, I mean, we're not on the battlefield that much anymore. Maybe we could make a more noob-friendly programming where people will bring their voices in, and maybe a guy like Aiken will step up and say, yeah, I do want to debate. I will spend a few hours, maybe even tens of hours, and prepare for a formal debate. And maybe his kids and grandkids will watch, and they'll be proud of him. And say, take your education as seriously. Here's your old man. Here's your grandpa that's still preparing for a debate because it's just a good academic exercise that enlightened people do at all ages. So hopefully Gandalf will be back in the ring, and maybe there'll be Aiken and more people coming. So I appreciate Jennifer pushing me on the outline for my book. She didn't do that for hers. I mean, if you want to just end the show, man, that's probably good with me. But if you want, we could push it off till next week. But if you want, I'll stay on for you to kind of go over how you would structure your book.
Let's just leave it till when we're fresh. I mean, that was a really long combo. We're going on 3 hours and 38 minutes of pure streaming. So, I mean, I would rather just do the one-on-one combos. I think it goes a lot farther, but I am also open to, book collaboration projects, but I don't want to go into the nitty gritty. I'll just do that with the person who wants to write, and we can talk a little bit more. But I mean, yeah, I still don't even have an idea of a book for my own stuff. It's more be a pamphlet, so I don't want to traipse into that morass of garbage at this time. So yeah, I had a great stream. I think this person is this Aiken person is a good example of yeah, you can hop off, Doovid, if you want. I might just monologue for a few minutes unless you had anything else you wanted to add.
No, great. Appreciate Week in Review. Blessings to everybody. Hope for good things. Elections this Tuesday here. If Luke gives me the link, or Halsey, I doubt, but if Luke gives me the link to talk this week, I'll probably talk to him. He said after elections. I think, Chuck Moskowitz probably do again this Thursday. But besides that, nothing much. Just going to keep on pushing forward on on this. I really appreciate Jennifer, the entropist, for keeping this forum open, and I really, this week especially, Jennifer, for encouraging me to really think about putting this multiple truth hypothesis book forward, and I think it's going to be coming soon. So appreciate Week in Review, and blessings, Jennifer, and whatever. I did watch last week your ramble after I signed off, and it was actually quite good and awesome. And as I said, I encourage Jennifer to monologue. So, but I'll watch it back tomorrow. And blessings, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks for joining. Hey guys, yeah. So just to come back to what I was rambling about a bit before, it's hard to come on because we've seen so many people come on and has gone really bad, and they didn't really realize, the extent of the BTFO, and it's just like I'm sympathetic to that. I also dread the uh, concept of public humiliation. So that said, I can't compromise on quality. It's just I think too highly of my audience, my followers, people in general, to deceive them in the interest of brevity. So it's a fine line, but I think people more or less know what to expect when they've been around for a while, because I know I can come off as monotone probably, but I'm just I suppose a steady person. Uh, I I do enjoy seeing people go through periods of personal growth and get to a point where they feel like they can assert more autonomy over their own decisions through various techniques of deeper insights about how we work. So talking about incidental things like signal processing, which those of you who've followed for a while know that my job was sort of in this field. I was more on the cosmetic end, but I did have to have some domain specific knowledge about signal processing. So it's always good to have a chance to speak the jargon. And at some point, we do need to assimilate some of this jargon into our own jargon if we're going to be able to talk about these concepts. So it's great to have somebody with domain specific knowledge that we can see, oh gosh, there's this huge jargon basis that is a bit daunting, but maybe we can see our way to plucking out a few elements of it if we can understand why they're important metaphors. So I'm totally enjoying all this delving into various metaphors. And with a metaphor like chunking, it's sort of beyond agreeing or disagreeing, because all you're really saying is that, well, you're taking information and you're dividing it up somehow into some sort of cookie cutter, which, for those who follow my theory, know that this lines up more or less with what my theory is saying. So it's correct in a universal sense, but then on the implementational level, are we implementing the technology 100% synced up with reality, or more around 10%? So it's interesting to hear Aiken talk today about how by synchronizing the growth of the circuit with the underlying whatever it's called, the basis model, or what they call a UBM, universal background model, that information, which is itself a compilation of a huge amount of information down to one archetype, from which all other things are measured as vectorial distances from said archetype. That's extremely important and extremely difficult to understand, but if you have practice with visualizing things like computer algorithms, well, it's just one step further, right? Because a computer has a certain geometry, but reality has a different geometry. It's spherical. So it's taking all that, not 100% correct, but partially part way there, and getting all the way there. And notice that we have these tremendous results where it's like, oh, I understood this thing about causality better. So I was able to ignore the fact that my subjectivity was giving me counterintuitive vibes and just go with the actual data. And that's also has a parallel within spiritual traditions, because the intuitions that we have are informed by history They're vestigial in some sense, in that they don't necessarily inform this perfect picture of the objective reality, because we're just not designed for that. We have this other design, which is survival. So thanks again to Aiken for both sending links and coming on the show. And I really appreciate the contribution. Same with Gandalf. And as usual, thanks, Doovid, for joining. I look forward to the next things that I will be publishing on my blogs. I'm not exactly sure what I'll be doing next, but I usually try to keep it relevant. So maybe it'll be something connected to what Aiken was going into some detail, which we greatly appreciated this evening. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Talk to you next Sunday, if not sooner.
Yeah, but that's just so to say, a worthless opinion of.
It's so important that she can't be told, she won't be told that it's wrong. And
bringing it back to Church of Entropy in her attack dog, Gandalf the White.
Why don't you learn to shut up and fuck goddamn logic?
They control the media, and the media is capable of making the sheeple believe in anything.
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, we've had these streams, and I've been doing with Church of Entropy, and she's been bringing on new people, and like we did those streams on like stream etiquette. We walked through like the technology.
I have like very strongly negative opinions of the kind of Brundle clique.
Is she trying to garner herself cult prestige by associating herself with a retard?